Before we dive into tonight's story, if you're enjoying this content, please consider using your hype points on this video. It helps the channel more than you possibly know. If you're listening on Spotify, leaving a review makes such a massive difference for us. Also, drop a comment letting us know what time it is where you are and where in the world you're tuning in from. We absolutely love seeing where everyone is listening. And if you enjoy these deep dives into the unexplained, hit that subscribe button. It really does help us keep bringing you these stories. A huge thank you to KB World for suggesting tonight's topic. This one goes deep. Now, imagine standing on a naval pier in October 1943. The air smells of salt and diesel. Around you, destroyers and battleships crowd the harbour, preparing for the war that consumes the world. You're not supposed to be here. None of the civilian contractors are supposed to be here after dark, but you stayed late finishing work on electrical systems below deck. That's when you see it. A ship at the far end of the pier begins to glow. Not the warm orange of floodlights. Something else. Something green and pulsing. The air around the vessel shimmers like heat rising from summer asphalt. Then the ship itself starts to fade. The edges go first, becoming translucent, almost ghostly. You can see straight through the hull to the water beyond. And then, in the span of a single heartbeat, the ship is gone. Completely. Just empty water where a 400-foot destroyer escort had been floating seconds before. You blink. You rub your eyes. You tell yourself it's exhaustion, that you've been working too many double shifts, that the war has everyone seeing things that aren't there. But 15 minutes later, when the ship reappears in the exact same spot with the same green glow and the same shimmering air, you know what you saw was real. This is the story of the Philadelphia experiment, a conspiracy, theory that refuses to die, a legend whispered about in naval circles and debated in classified meetings, an experiment that, if true, represents one of the most dangerous scientific breakthroughs in human history. And if false, raises an even more disturbing question. Why did so many people need to believe it happened? The ship that vanished at the pier. Chapter 1. A war built on secrets. The Atlantic Ocean in 1943 was a graveyard. German U-boats prowled beneath the waves, silent and lethal, sinking Allied merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. Entire convoys disappeared in the black water between America and Britain. Torpedoes struck without warning. Men drowned in freezing darkness. Oil fires spread across the surface, turning the ocean into an inferno. The Allies were losing the Battle of the Atlantic. Not publicly, not in the newspapers or radio broadcasts that kept civilian morale high, but in the classified briefings that happened in windowless rooms deep inside the Pentagon. The truth was undeniable. If the U-boat threat wasn't neutralized soon, Britain would starve. The invasion of Europe would become impossible. The war might be lost. The United States Navy needed solutions, radical ones. Traditional naval tactics weren't working. Destroyers could hunt submarines, but only if they could find them first. Radar helped, but it had limitations. Sonar was better, but German U-boats had learned to dive deep, to hide in thermal layers where sound waves scattered uselessly. What the Navy needed was something revolutionary, something that would render the U-boat threat obsolete. They needed invisibility, not the fantasy version from science fiction novels. Something real, something based on physics and electromagnetic theory. If a ship could be made invisible to radar, it would be untouchable. It could escort convoys across the Atlantic without fear of torpedo attack. It could hunt U-boats without being detected. It could change the entire trajectory of the war. The Office of Scientific Research and Development, established in 1941, had already proven that radical wartime innovation was possible. They'd fast-tracked the development of radar, sonar, and the proximity fuse. They'd assembled the greatest scientific minds in the country and given them unlimited budgets and classified laboratories. Why not invisibility? Research into electromagnetic fields had exploded during the late 1930s. Scientists understood that radio waves, radar waves, and light itself were all part of the electromagnetic spectrum. They behaved according to predictable mathematical principles. They could be reflected, refracted, absorbed, or scattered. and if they could be controlled precisely enough, they could theoretically be bent around an object, rendering that object invisible to detection. This wasn't magic. This was physics. Or at least that's what the proposal document suggested. The ones that were never meant to be seen by the public. The ones that outlined experimental research into radar camouflage, electromagnetic field generation, and optical distortion. The Philadelphia Naval Shipyard became one of the most secure facilities on the East Coast during the war. Entire sections were off limits, even to officers with top-secret clearance. Civilian contractors who worked on experimental equipment signed documents promising never to discuss what they'd seen. Armed guards patrolled the piers 24 hours a day. Something was happening there. Something beyond standard ship construction and repair. The question is, how far did they go? Chapter 2. The ship at the centre, USS Eldridge, was unremarkable in almost every way. A Cannon-class destroyer escort. Hull number D-173, commissioned on August 27th, 1943, 306 feet long, displacement just over 1,000 tons, crew complement of approximately 216 officers and enlisted men. She was one of 72 identical ships built during the war, mass-produced, functional, designed for convoy escort duty in the Atlantic, armed with 3-inch guns, depth charges, and Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars. Nothing about her construction suggested anything unusual. The official Navy records for USS Eldridge are complete and detailed. They show her shakedown cruise, her assignments, her movements between ports. According to these documents, she spent the fall of 1943 conducting trials and training exercises along the East Coast. In October 1943, while the conspiracy claims she was undergoing experimental modification in Philadelphia, the official logs place her in New York and then in the Bahamas. The records are clear, the dates are specific, the documentation appears authentic. But conspiracy researchers point to several anomalies. First, there are gaps, small ones, periods of 2 or 3, days where the ship's location isn't specified beyond coastal operations or training exercises. During wartime, such vague entries were common for security reasons, but they also provide windows during which unauthorized activities could have occurred. Second, the Eldridge was assigned to the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard for her commissioning. She was there during the exact time period the conspiracy claims the experiment took place. She had access to experimental facilities. She was surrounded by classified research programs. Third, several crew members from other ships stationed in Philadelphia during October 1943 later reported seeing unusual activity around Pier 4, where destroyer escorts underwent modification and testing. Green lights, strange humming sounds, entire sections of the pier cordoned off without explanation. Were they remembering USS Eldridge specifically? Probably not. Memory is unreliable, especially decades later, but something was happening at that pier during the fall of 1943. The Eldridge herself was a perfect candidate for experimental modification. She was new. She hadn't been assigned to active combat duty yet. Her crew was still in training. If an experiment failed catastrophically, the loss wouldn't impact ongoing operations, and if it succeeded, the implications would change naval warfare forever. The ship's design also made her suitable for electromagnetic experiments. Destroyer escorts had powerful electrical generators to run radar, sonar and fire control systems. They had reinforced hulls designed to handle depth charge explosions. They had enough internal space to install additional equipment without compromising combat capability. From an engineering standpoint, USS Eldridge was exactly the kind of vessel the Navy would choose for radical testing. The official position remains unchanged. Nothing unusual happened aboard USS Eldridge. No experiments, no modifications beyond. Standard equipment. No invisibility tests. But the ship's very ordinariness makes the conspiracy more compelling. If you wanted to conduct a secret experiment, you wouldn't use a unique vessel that would attract attention. You'd use something common. Something that could blend in with dozens of identical ships. Something like USS Eldridge. Chapter 3. The Invisible Test. The experiment allegedly took place on October 28, 1943. According to the conspiracy theory, experimental electromagnetic generators had been installed aboard USS Eldridge over the previous weeks. These weren't standard naval equipment. They were prototype devices, built based on theoretical research into field manipulation and radar camouflage. The generators were massive. Each one weighed several tons. They were positioned at specific locations throughout the ship, creating a geometric pattern that would, in theory, generate a controlled electromagnetic field around the entire hull. The principle was elegant. If you could create a strong enough electromagnetic field with the correct frequency and shape, you could bend radar waves around the ship. The radar would pass through the field, curve around the vessel, and continue on the other side. To radar operators, the ship would simply not exist. But radar invisibility was just the beginning. According to the theory, the researchers believed they could extend the same principle to visible light. If the electromagnetic field was powerful enough and precisely calibrated, it could bend light waves just like radar waves. The ship would become optically invisible, not transparent, not camouflaged, actually invisible. On the morning of October 28th, USS Eldridge was moored at Pier 4. The pier had been cleared of all non-essential personnel. Armed guards prevented anyone from approaching within 200 yards. Even the ships moored at adjacent piers had been moved. At exactly 1000 hours, the experiment began. The generators powered up. A low humming sound filled the air, felt more than heard. The frequency was below the threshold of human hearing, but it vibrated through the pier's wooden planks and the steel of nearby ships. Then came the light. Witnesses from nearby vessels reported seeing a greenish glow surrounding USS Eldridge. Not bright, not like floodlights, more like phosphorescence, like the glow of certain deep-sea creatures. It pulsed in rhythm with the humming sound. The air around the ship began to shimmer. The visual distortion was similar to heat waves rising from hot pavement, but more intense. The edges of the ship became blurry, indistinct. It became difficult to focus on the vessel. Your eyes kept sliding off it, unable to maintain a clear image. And then, according to the most extreme versions of the story, USS Eldridge began to fade. Not slowly, not gradually. The ship went from solid to translucent in the span of perhaps 10 seconds. You could see through the hull, through the superstructure. You could see the water on the opposite side of where the ship floated. Some witnesses claimed they could still see a faint outline, a ghostly suggestion of where the ship had been. Others claimed total invisibility, just empty water. The state persisted for approximately 15 minutes. During that time, the humming sound continued. The green glow remained visible even though the ship itself had vanished. The air above the pier rippled and distorted like looking up through water. Then the generators began to power down. The process reversed. The outline of the ship became visible first, then more solid. The translucence faded. Within 30 seconds, USS Eldridge was completely visible again, floating exactly where she'd been before. The experiment had worked. Or so the story goes. Chapter 4. Teleportation to Norfolk. But the conspiracy doesn't end with simple invisibility. According to the most controversial version of events, something unexpected happened during those 15 minutes when USS Eldridge was invisible. The ship didn't just disappear from view, it disappeared from Philadelphia entirely. Multiple witnesses allegedly stationed at the Norfolk Naval Shipyard in Virginia, approximately 200 miles south of Philadelphia, reported seeing a destroyer escort suddenly materialize at one of the piers. It appeared out of nowhere. No approach, no warning. Just suddenly present where empty water had been moments before. The ship was surrounded by the same greenish glow, the same shimmering distortion in the air, and it was clearly in distress. Crew members were visible on deck, stumbling, disoriented. Some were screaming. The ship itself seemed unstable, fading in and out of visibility even as it sat at the pier. The apparition lasted only a few minutes. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, USS Eldridge vanished from Norfolk. Disappeared completely, left nothing but confused witnesses and roiling water. In Philadelphia, when the ship rematerialized at Pier 4, the timeline matched. The ship had vanished from Philadelphia at 1000 hours. It appeared in Norfolk perhaps 5 minutes later. It remained visible there for 3 to 4 minutes. Then it disappeared from Norfolk and reappeared in Philadelphia at 10:15. Total elapsed time, 15 minutes. The conspiracy theory suggests that the electromagnetic field didn't just bend light and radar, it somehow bent space itself, created a temporary bridge between two locations, teleported a 400-foot destroyer escort 200 miles in less time than it takes to drink a cup of coffee. The physics for such an occurrence don't exist, not in any accepted scientific framework. Einstein's theories allow for the bending of space-time, but the energy requirements for creating a traversable wormhole would be astronomical, far beyond what any shipboard generator could produce. But wartime, desperation sometimes pushes science into territory it's not ready for. The Navy's official position on the Norfolk sighting is simple. It didn't happen. No destroyer escort appeared at Norfolk on October 28, 1943. No records document such an event. No investigation was launched. Conspiracy theorists respond with the obvious. Of course, there are no records. Any evidence would have been classified at the highest possible level. Any witnesses would have been sworn to secrecy. Any documentation would have been destroyed decades ago. The lack of evidence becomes evidence itself. But there's another possibility. Perhaps USS Eldridge did achieve some form of invisibility in Philadelphia. Perhaps the intense electromagnetic field created unexpected side effects, including optical phenomena visible at great distances. Perhaps witnesses in Norfolk saw something in the sky, or water, that their minds interpreted as a ship, influenced by wartime tension and the expectation of seeing strange things. Human perception is unreliable under stress. Electromagnetic fields can affect brain function. The combination of genuine scientific experimentation and observer error could create a legend far more dramatic than the actual events. Unless, of course, the actual events were exactly as dramatic as the legend suggests. Chapter 5. The Crew That Came Back Wrong. The darkest part of the Philadelphia experiment conspiracy involves what happened to the crew. According to the theory, when USS Eldridge rematerialized at Pier 4 after her 15-minute absence, something was terribly wrong. The ship was intact, structurally undamaged, all systems functional, but the crew was not. Men stumbled onto the deck, disoriented and terrified. Some were vomiting, others couldn't stand without support. Several were found unconscious below deck. A few were catatonic, staring at nothing, unresponsive to commands or questions, but the physical symptoms were just the beginning. According to the conspiracy, some crew members had been fused with the ship's structure, partially phased into the metal during the materialization process. One man allegedly had his hand embedded in a steel bulkhead. Another was found with part of his body merged with the deck plating. The attempts to extract them were unsuccessful. Other crew members had vanished entirely. When the roll call was conducted, 5 men were missing. They'd been aboard when the experiment started. They were gone when it ended. No bodies, no trace, just empty spaces where sailors should have been. The psychological effects were perhaps worse than the physical ones. Men who had experienced the invisibility and teleportation reported complete disorientation. During the time the ship was invisible, they'd perceived themselves as existing in multiple places simultaneously. They'd seen through the ship's hull. They'd felt the presence of the ocean 200 miles away in Norfolk even, while standing in Philadelphia. Some described it as being torn apart and reassembled. Others said they'd briefly ceased to exist and then been pulled back into reality. The trauma was profound and permanent. In the days following the experiment, crew members began experiencing what conspiracy theorists call spontaneous invisibility. Without warning, a sailor would suddenly fade from view, sometimes for a few seconds, sometimes for minutes. They'd reappear disoriented, with no memory of where they'd been or what had happened. Several men reportedly went completely invisible and never came back. The Navy, according to the theory, had no choice but to hospitalize the affected crew members. Not in regular naval medical facilities, but in psychiatric institutions where they could be isolated and monitored, where their stories could be contained. Some were given experimental treatments to reverse the effects. These treatments were largely unsuccessful. The electromagnetic exposure had fundamentally altered them at a level beyond current medical understanding. Others were simply kept sedated, hidden away, their service records altered to show discharges for routine medical reasons. Is any of this true? The Navy says absolutely not. No crew members were harmed. No one was hospitalised for reasons related to electromagnetic experiments. No one was fused with the ship's structure or experienced spontaneous invisibility. But families of USS Eldridge crew members have reported strange things over the decades. Letters that mention the test without providing details, refusals to discuss certain events from the war, nightmares about disappearing, medical issues that doctors couldn't explain. Are these connected to a real experiment? Or are they the normal trauma responses of men who served in a brutal war and came home changed by what they'd experienced? The truth might be simpler and sadder than the conspiracy. War damages people. The experience of combat, of constant fear of witnessing death, leaves psychological scars that last forever. Maybe the crew of USS Eldridge didn't experience electromagnetic trauma. Maybe they just experienced war. But the specificity of the reports is troubling. The consistency of certain details across multiple witnesses. The way the stories align despite coming from men who had no contact with each other after the war. Something happened to the crew of USS Eldridge. The question is whether it was physics or just horror. Chapter 6. The Name That Keeps Appearing. Nikola Tesla died on January 7th, 1943. He was found alone in his room at the New Yorker Hotel in Manhattan, 86 years old, impoverished despite his genius, surrounded by papers and notebooks filled with decades of research. The FBI seized those papers within hours of his death, classified them immediately, claimed they contained information relevant to national security. Most of Tesla's seized research was eventually released to his family and the public, but some documents remained classified. Some were allegedly destroyed, and some, according to conspiracy theorists, were delivered directly to the Office of Scientific Research and Development. Tesla had spent his career working with electromagnetic fields. He'd developed alternating current systems, wireless power transmission, and devices that could generate massive electrical discharges. His research into resonance and field effects was decades ahead of contemporary science, and he'd written extensively about invisibility. Not as science fiction, as achievable physics. Tesla believed that electromagnetic fields of sufficient strength and frequency could be used to bend light. He'd proposed using arrays of generators to create controlled field geometries. He'd calculated the power requirements. He'd even built small-scale prototypes that could make objects shimmer and partially disappear. The technology wasn't ready during his lifetime. The generators required weren't powerful enough. The control systems weren't precise enough, but the theoretical foundation was solid. When Tesla died in January 1943, his research became available to the military. When the Philadelphia experiment allegedly occurred in October 1943, it came less than 9 months after Tesla's death. Conspiracy theorists see a direct connection. They believe Tesla's papers provided the blueprint for the electromagnetic generators installed aboard USS Eldridge. That Navy scientist attempted to implement his theories without fully understanding them, that the catastrophic results came from rushing into experimentation without adequate testing. The timing is certainly suggestive, but there's no documentary evidence linking Tesla's research to the Philadelphia experiment, no memos referencing his work, no testimony from scientists claiming they used his calculations. What does exist is a pattern of the government seizing and classifying the research of brilliant scientists immediately after their deaths. It happened with Tesla. It happened with others. The papers were evaluated for military applications. Some were implemented, some were filed away, some were probably misunderstood and misapplied. If the Philadelphia experiment happened, and if it was based on electromagnetic field theory, then Tesla's research would have been relevant. His papers would have been reviewed. His calculations might have influenced the generator design. But influence is different from direct causation. Tesla can't be held responsible for an experiment that allegedly happened 9 months after his death. He never consented to military applications of his work. He never approved the specific implementation aboard USS Eldridge. He's simply the ghost whose presence makes the conspiracy more scientifically plausible. Chapter 7. Einstein and Unified Fields. Albert Einstein never worked directly on military projects during World War II, or at least that's the public story. Einstein had written to President Roosevelt in August 1939, warning him about the possibility of Nazi Germany developing atomic weapons. That letter helped to launch the Manhattan Project. But Einstein himself was considered a security risk due to his pacifist views and was excluded from the bomb development program. Instead, Einstein worked as a consultant for the Navy's Bureau of Ordnance from May 1943 through June 1944. His work involved conventional explosives and torpedo design, nothing exotic, nothing related to electromagnetic field manipulation. But Einstein had spent years working on his unified field theory. The goal was ambitious: create a single mathematical framework that would unite electromagnetism and gravity. If successful, it would represent the most profound achievement in theoretical physics. It would explain how all forces in the universe related to each other. It would reveal the fundamental structure of reality itself. Einstein never completed the unified field theory. He worked on it until his death in 1955. He published several incomplete versions. None were successful. But the research existed. The partial equations existed. And they suggested that under certain extreme conditions, electromagnetic fields could interact with gravitational fields in unexpected ways. Conspiracy theorists believe the Navy obtained access to Einstein's preliminary unified field theory calculations, that they saw the potential for practical applications, that they decided to test whether strong electromagnetic fields could create gravitational distortions, not for invisibility, for something more fundamental, for bending space-time itself. The Philadelphia experiment in this version wasn't about radar camouflage, it was about teleportation, about creating a shortcut through space by manipulating the fabric of reality with electromagnetic force. Einstein's equation suggested it might be possible. The Navy had the resources to attempt it. USS Eldridge became the test platform, and the results were catastrophic because the theory was incomplete. The scientists didn't understand what they were dealing with. They generated a field strong enough to punch through space-time, but they couldn't control where it led or how stable it would be. The ship didn't just become invisible. It briefly ceased to exist in normal space. It entered some transitional state between dimensions, between locations, between moments of time. When it returned, the crew had experienced something human. Biology wasn't designed to handle. Their atoms had been scattered and reassembled. Their consciousness had been fragmented across multiple points in space. They came back wrong because they'd been to a place where the normal rules of physics didn't apply. This is the most speculative version of the conspiracy. Requires not just secret experiments, but secret physics. It requires Einstein's involvement despite his official exclusion from classified work. It requires technology far beyond what 1943 engineering could achieve. But it also explains the more extreme claims. Simple invisibility doesn't account for teleportation. Radar camouflage doesn't explain crew members fusing with ship structure. But a failed attempt to manipulate space-time using incomplete theoretical physics explains everything. It explains why the Navy would deny it so strenuously. Not just because it failed, but because it revealed knowledge that shouldn't exist yet. Knowledge about the fundamental nature of reality that humanity wasn't ready to possess. Einstein's equations remain the foundation of modern physics, but some of his research remains classified even today. Some of his calculations about extreme field effects have never been fully published. The question is whether those classified calculations were ever tested aboard a destroyer escort in Philadelphia Harbour. Chapter 8. The Witness Who Wouldn't Stop Writing. In January 1956, a researcher named Morris Jessup received a strange letter. Jessup had published a book called The Case for the UFO in 1955. It explored the possibility of extraterrestrial visitation and advanced propulsion systems. The book was moderately successful in the growing UFO enthusiast community. The letter came from someone calling themselves Carlos Miguel Allende. Sometimes he signed his name Carl Allen. The handwriting was erratic, the grammar was unusual, but the content was extraordinary. Allende claimed to have witnessed the Philadelphia experiment firsthand. He said he'd been a merchant seaman aboard the SS Andrew Forsyth, which had been moored near USS Eldridge in Philadelphia during October 1943. He'd seen the destroyer escort disappear. He'd seen it reappear. He'd witnessed crew members suffering from the effects of the experiment. The letter was detailed. It provided specific dates, though they didn't always match the October 28th time frame other versions of the story used. It named individuals. It described the greenish glow and the shimmering air. It mentioned the teleportation to Norfolk, and it claimed that the experiment was based on Einstein's unified field theory. Jessup was intrigued but skeptical. He wrote back asking for more information, for evidence, for anything that could verify Allende's claims. Allende responded with more letters, each one more elaborate than the last. He said the Navy had continued experiments, that crew members had experienced spontaneous invisibility years after the initial test, that there was an ongoing cover-up involving hospitals and altered service records, but he provided no physical evidence, no photographs, no documentation, just his testimony. Jessup eventually dismissed Allende as either delusional or a hoaxer. The letters stopped coming. Then, in 1957, something strange happened. The Office of Naval Research received a package. Inside was a copy of Jessup's UFO book, heavily annotated in the margins. The annotations appeared to be written by 3 different people, discussing the book's content and adding their own commentary about secret Navy experiments, advanced propulsion systems, and the Philadelphia experiment. The handwriting in the margins matched Allende's letters. The Office of Naval Research, for reasons that remain unclear, took the annotated book seriously. They contacted Jessup. They asked him questions about Allende. They even produced a limited run of mimeographed copies of the annotated book for internal distribution. Why would the Navy care about a crackpot's margin notes? Conspiracy theorists believe the Navy recognized details in Allende's annotations that could only have come from someone with inside knowledge, that they were trying to assess whether classified information had been leaked, that they were attempting to track down the source of the leak. Skeptics argue the Navy's interest was routine. They investigated all claims related to secret projects, no matter how implausible, to ensure nothing genuine was being revealed. Jessup grew increasingly disturbed by the Navy's attention. In April 1959, he was found dead in his car in Florida. The engine was running. A hose connected the exhaust to the interior. The death was ruled a suicide. But the timing raised questions. Jessup had been corresponding with researchers about the Philadelphia experiment just weeks before his death. He'd mentioned receiving threatening calls. He'd seemed paranoid about surveillance. Was his death truly suicide? Or was it connected to his investigation of the Navy's most controversial secret experiment? Allende himself remained elusive. He gave interviews decades later, sometimes confirming his story, sometimes recanting it. His credibility was always questionable, his mental state always uncertain, but his letters remain, the annotated book remains, and the question remains: how did a merchant seaman with no scientific background produce such detailed descriptions of theoretical physics experiments? Either Allende witnessed something real and spent decades trying to get someone to listen, or he created one of the most elaborate hoaxes in conspiracy theory history. The evidence for either conclusion is frustratingly incomplete. Chapter 9. The Navy's Firm Denial. The United States Navy has denied the Philadelphia experiment consistently and unambiguously since the story first became public. Their official statement, issued multiple times over the decades, is clear. No destroyer escort was ever made invisible. No ship was ever teleported. No crew members were harmed in electromagnetic field experiments. The USS Eldridge's logs show she was nowhere near Philadelphia on October 28, 1943. The Navy has released portions of USS Eldridge's service record. These documents show the ship conducting routine operations along the East Coast during the fall of 1943. There are no gaps that would allow time for experimental modification and testing. The crew roster shows no unusual casualties, no unexplained hospitalizations, no mass psychiatric discharges. The Philadelphia Naval Shipyard records show no evidence of experimental electromagnetic equipment being installed on any destroyer escort during this period. From the Navy's perspective, the case is closed. The Philadelphia experiment is fiction, a myth created by confused witnesses, elaborated by attention seekers like Allende, and perpetuated by conspiracy theorists who prefer exciting stories to boring reality. But conspiracy researchers point to several problems with the Navy's denial. First, the denials came decades after the alleged event. The first official Navy statement about the Philadelphia experiment wasn't issued until 1986. That's 43 years of silence. If the experiment was pure fiction, why did it take so long to deny it? Second, the release documents are selective. The Navy chose which portions of USS Eldridge's record to declassify. They chose which logs to make public. Any evidence of experimental activity could have been excluded from the release. Third, wartime records are notoriously incomplete. Ships' logs from World War II were sometimes falsified for security reasons. Locations were deliberately vague. Activities were coded or omitted entirely. The absence of evidence in the official record doesn't prove the absence of the event itself. Fourth, the Navy has a documented history of conducting secret experiments on ships and crews without informed consent. Radiation exposure tests, biological agent tests, psychological stress tests. These experiments were denied for decades before eventually being declassified and acknowledged. If the Navy conducted an experimental invisibility test in 1943, and if that test resulted in crew casualties, they would have every reason to deny it. The legal implications would be enormous. The ethical violations would be severe. The damage to public trust would be irreparable. Better to maintain the denial indefinitely. Better to dismiss the conspiracy as nonsense. Better to rely on the lack of physical evidence and the unreliability of witness testimony. The problem with this analysis is that it's unfalsifiable. Any evidence supporting the Navy's denial can be reinterpreted as part of the cover-up. The very lack of evidence becomes evidence of how thorough the cover-up has been. This is the fundamental problem with conspiracy theories. They're constructed to be self-sustaining. Every denial strengthens belief. Every missing document proves the conspiracy's reach. But sometimes denials are just denials. Sometimes the absence of evidence really does indicate the absence of events. The USS Eldridge served throughout World War II and into the post-war period. She was eventually transferred to Greece in 1951 and renamed HS Lyon. She served in the Greek Navy until 1992, then was sold for scrap. At no point during her 50-year service life did she demonstrate any unusual properties. No spontaneous invisibility, no electromagnetic anomalies, no crew members experiencing strange effects. She was just a ship, an ordinary destroyer escort that happened to become the centre of an extraordinary story. Chapter 10: Why the Story Survived. The Philadelphia experiment has no photographs, no official documents, no physical evidence, no credible witnesses who've maintained consistent testimony under scrutiny. By any reasonable standard, it should have been forgotten decades ago. Instead, it's become one of the most enduring conspiracy theories in American history. Books, movies, television shows, and countless internet discussions keep it alive. Each generation discovers the story and debates its plausibility. Why? Because the Philadelphia experiment represents something deeper than just an alleged naval test. It represents humanity's relationship with scientific progress. The question of whether we reach too far, whether we experiment without understanding the consequences, whether the pursuit of military advantage justifies any risk. The story resonates because wartime secrecy was real. The Manhattan Project proved that massive scientific programs could be kept hidden, even while employing thousands of people. If the government could build atomic weapons in secret, why not invisibility devices? The story resonates because radical experiments did happen. The Navy did conduct tests on ships and crews. Some were successful, some were disasters, some remain classified even today. The story resonates because the official denials came so late. 43. Years of silence create suspicion. If the experiment was obviously false, why not deny it immediately? The story resonates because it involves recognizable elements. Real ships, real locations, real scientists, real physics, even if extrapolated beyond current capabilities. It's not aliens or magic, it's just technology pushed past the breaking point. The story resonates because it's tragic. The crew members who allegedly suffered weren't villains or volunteers. They were ordinary sailors following orders. If the experiment happened as described, it represents a profound violation of trust between military and service members. And perhaps most importantly, the story resonates because it can't be definitively disproven. The lack of evidence cuts both ways. You can't prove the experiment happened, but you also can't prove it didn't happen. Not with absolute certainty. Not given the realities of wartime secrecy and classified research. The Philadelphia experiment exists in the space, between possible and proven, between physics and fantasy, between what we know happened and what we suspect might have happened. It's a story about the cost of scientific advancement, about the dangers of treating human beings as experimental subjects, about the secrets that governments keep and the lies they tell to maintain those secrets. Whether it's true or not almost doesn't matter. The story serves a purpose. It reminds us to question authority, to demand transparency, to remember that progress without ethics is just cruelty with better technology. The destroyer escort USS Eldridge was real. The Philadelphia Naval Shipyard was real. The desperate search for military advantage during World War II was real. Electromagnetic field research was real. Tesla's work was real. Einstein's theories were real. Everything around the edges of the conspiracy is documented and verifiable. It's only the centre that remains in doubt. And that's exactly where the most important questions leave. Epilogue. The pier is still there. The Philadelphia Naval Shipyard is quiet now. Most of it was closed in 1995. The massive facility that once employed thousands of workers and launched hundreds of ships now sits largely abandoned. Some sections have been redeveloped into commercial and residential space. Others remain empty, waiting for decisions about their future. Pier 4, where USS Eldridge allegedly underwent her transformation from ordinary destroyer escort to invisible vessel, is still there. The wooden planks have been replaced multiple times over the decades, but the basic structure remains. Water still laps against the pilings. Seabirds still perch on the bollards where thick mooring lines once secured warships. There's no marker, no plaque commemorating what may or may not have happened there in October 1943. No memorial to the crew members who allegedly suffered and disappeared. Just water and wood and steel and silence. If you stand on that pier today, you can imagine how it looked 80 years ago. The harbour crowded with ships, the air thick with diesel smoke and welding sparks, armed guards patrolling in the darkness, scientists huddled over calculation sheets, trying to turn theoretical physics into practical military advantage. You can imagine the moment when the generators powered up, when the humming filled the air, when the greenish glow surrounded a 400-foot destroyer escort and the ship began to shimmer and fade. You can imagine crew members standing on deck, following orders, trusting their officers, having no idea that they were about to become part of something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Or you can imagine none of it happened, that the pier was just a pier, that USS Eldridge was just a ship, that October 28th, 1943 was just another day in a long war. The water holds no answers, the metal reveals nothing, the documents are incomplete and contradictory. The witnesses are dead or unreliable. The truth, if it ever existed, has been buried under 80 years of denial, speculation, embellishment and doubt. Some experiments leave data, published papers, photographs, equipment that can be examined and verified. Other experiments leave only stories, whispered accounts that grow more elaborate with each retelling, legends that serve a purpose even if they're not factual. And some experiments, the ones that go catastrophically wrong, leave only silence. only the question of whether we were ever meant to try. The Philadelphia experiment might be the most elaborate hoax in conspiracy theory history. A story constructed from misidentified events, wartime confusion, and decades of fictional embellishment. Or it might be exactly what the witnesses claimed. A radical test of invisibility technology that succeeded beyond anyone's expectations and failed beyond anyone's nightmares. The evidence doesn't support a definitive conclusion either way. But standing on Pier 4, looking out at the water where USS Eldridge may or may not have vanished, you understand why the story persists. Because somewhere, in some classified archive or some sailor's suppressed memory, the truth exists, and the truth, whatever it is almost certainly more disturbing than either version we've been told. The ship is gone. The pier remains. And the question of what happened there in October 1943 continues to echo across the decades, unanswered and unanswerable. Some secrets aren't meant to be kept, but some secrets refuse to be revealed. The Philadelphia experiment is both. Before we begin tonight's story, if you're enjoying this content, please consider using your hype points on this video. It helps the channel more than you could possibly know. If you're listening on Spotify, leaving a review makes an enormous difference for us as well. And if you want, drop a comment telling us what time it is, where you are, and where in the world you're tuning in from. We absolutely love seeing where everyone is listening. And if you enjoy these deep dives into history's mysteries, please subscribe. Tonight's story comes from a suggestion by Dogface680, and we cannot thank you enough for this idea. This is one of the most compelling conspiracy theories rooted in actual Cold War history, and what makes it so haunting is how much of it is documented fact. What you're about to hear sounds impossible. A 4-star general, a war hero, the man who helped liberate Europe from Nazi tyranny, dead in a hospital bed just months after victory, following a minor car accident that shouldn't have killed anyone. No autopsy, no investigation. Medical records vanished, witnesses disappeared, and decades later, a former intelligence operative steps forward with a confession that changes everything. This is the story of General George Smith Patton Jr., the man who won the war but lost the peace, the general who believed he had fought in past lives alongside Alexander the Great and Napoleon Bonaparte, who believed in destiny and glory and refused to be silent when silence was demanded. This is the story of his mysterious death, and the conspiracy theory that suggests the greatest threat to George Patton wasn't the Nazi Wehrmacht, it was his own government. December 9th, 1945. Near Mannheim, Germany. The war is over. Europe lies in ruins, cities reduced to rubble, railways destroyed, bridges collapsed. Millions dead, millions more displaced. The Third Reich, which promised to last 1,000 years, lasted 12 and ended in a Berlin bunker with a gunshot. Victory belongs to the Allies, and General George Smith Patton Jr., the most aggressive, most decorated, most controversial American commander of World War II, sits in occupied Germany with nothing left to conquer. He is 60 years old. His hair is silver. His face is weathered from years of command in the Mediterranean sun, the French countryside, the German winter. He wears his pearl-handled revolvers on his hips, relics of an earlier era when generals still led cavalry charges. He looks like something from another century, and in many ways he is. Patton believes he fought at the walls of Troy. He believes he rode with the Romans into Carthage. He believes he charged with Napoleon at Austerlitz. Past life memories, he calls them. Visions of ancient battles that feel more real than dreams. His officers think he's eccentric. His soldiers think he's touched by God. His enemies learned not to think about him at all until it was too late. But now, in December 1945, Patton is no longer commanding armies. He is no longer shaping strategy. He is no longer needed. The Third Army, which he led across France and into the heart of Germany, has been reassigned. His new command is a paper organisation with no soldiers, no tanks, no mission beyond compiling reports that no one will read. He is waiting to go home, and he is angry. That morning, December 9th, Patton wakes before dawn in his quarters at Bad Nauheim, a spa town north of Frankfurt that serves as headquarters for what remains of his command. He eats breakfast alone, as is his custom. Eggs, toast, coffee. He reviews intelligence reports from the Soviet occupation zone. He reads dispatches from Washington. He writes in his diary, the leather-bound journal he has kept since West Point, filling page after page with his cramped handwriting. Today's entry is bitter. They have sidelined me. Eisenhower fears what I might say. The politicians fear what I might do. The Soviets fear I might be right. So here I sit, a relic, while Europe burns. He signs his name with a flourish, as always. George Smith Patton Jr., 4 stars, Third Army. At 9:30 in the morning, he receives word that a pheasant hunting expedition has been arranged for that afternoon. It's one of his few remaining pleasures, a brief escape from the tedium of meaningless command. His Chief of Staff, Major General Hobart Gay, will accompany him. They'll take one of the staff cars, drive south toward Mannheim, spend a few hours in the countryside. It should be routine. At 11 o'clock, Patton descends the stairs of his headquarters building. His boots echo on the marble floors. Officers snap to attention as he passes. He returns their salutes mechanically, his mind already elsewhere, already planning the afternoon hunt, already thinking about the estate where the pheasants run wild. Outside, a Cadillac Model 75 sedan waits. Black paint, chrome trim, the kind of vehicle befitting a general officer. The driver stands beside it, a young private first class who has been assigned to Patton's detail for less than 2 weeks. This is the first irregularity. Patton's regular driver, a sergeant named John Mims, who had driven him for 3 years through combat and occupation, was transferred on December 1st. No explanation was given. Mims, interviewed decades later by researchers, said the transfer was sudden and unusual. He was given orders to report to another unit immediately. He never drove for Patton again. The replacement driver's name is in the accident report, but researchers have never been able to locate his service records. The man seems to have vanished from military documentation after December 9th. Patton climbs into the back seat. General Gay joins him. The driver starts the engine. They pull out of the headquarters compound and onto the road leading south. It's a cold morning. Frost covers the fields. The sky is grey, low clouds threatening snow. The roads are in poor condition, still cratered from the fighting, still littered with debris from the bombardment that reduced Mannheim to ruins earlier in the war. Traffic is light, a few military trucks, some civilian vehicles, German citizens walking along the roadside, bundled against the cold, their faces hollow with hunger and defeat. Patton watches the landscape pass. He has driven these roads dozens of times. He knows every turn, every checkpoint, every landmark. At approximately 11:45, near a railroad crossing on the outskirts of Mannheim, the car approaches an intersection. A United States Army truck, a 2.5-ton vehicle painted olive drab, approaches from a side road. What happens next takes 3 seconds. The truck makes a sudden left turn, cutting directly across the path of Patton's Cadillac. The driver of the Cadillac swerves right, tyres skidding on the frost-slicked pavement. The vehicles collide, the sound of metal against metal. the crunch of breaking glass, the hiss of steam from a ruptured radiator, and then silence. The driver of the Cadillac climbs out, shaken but uninjured. General Gay opens his door, checking himself for injuries. Nothing. A few bruises, perhaps. Nothing serious. He turns to check on Patton and sees him slumped in the back seat, conscious but unable to move. "My neck," Patton says quietly. "I think my neck is broken." Within minutes, military police arrive. Within an hour, Patton is on his way to Heidelberg. Within days, the official story begins to fracture under the weight of its own inconsistencies. And within 12 days, George Smith Patton Jr. is dead. Chapter 1. The General Who Became a Problem. To understand why conspiracy theories surround Patton's death, you have to understand who Patton was in the final months of his life, and more importantly, what he represented to the emerging Cold War order. George Smith Patton Jr. was never meant for peacetime. He was born into a military family in California in 1885. His grandfather fought for the Confederacy. His father was a politician. Young George grew up hearing stories of cavalry charges and desperate last stands, of honour and glory and the warrior's code. He attended the Virginia Military Institute, then West Point. He competed in the Stockholm Olympics in 1912, finishing 5th in the modern pentathlon. He served under General John Pershing in Mexico, chasing Pancho Villa through the desert. He commanded tanks in World War I, was wounded in combat, came home with a chest full of medals and a reputation as a fighter. Between the wars, he studied. He read military history obsessively. Caesar, Alexander, Hannibal, Frederick the Great, Napoleon. He believed war was an art form, that great commanders were born, not made, that destiny selected certain men for greatness. He believed he was one of those men. When World War II came, Patton was ready. He commanded American forces in North Africa, in Sicily, in France. His Third Army swept across Europe faster than anyone thought possible. His tactics were aggressive, sometimes reckless. He believed in speed and shock and overwhelming force. He believed hesitation killed more soldiers than enemy fire. His methods worked. The Germans feared him more than any other Allied commander. They repositioned entire divisions based on intelligence about Patton's location. They assumed wherever Patton was, the main attack would follow. Often, they were right. But Patton was more than just a brilliant tactician. He was also politically tone-deaf, personally abrasive, and constitutionally incapable of diplomacy. He slapped shell-shocked soldiers in field hospitals, calling them cowards. He gave speeches praising the fighting spirit of the German army. He made jokes about the Holocaust that appalled other officers. He criticised Allied strategy in press conferences. He feuded with British commanders. He defied orders when he thought they were stupid. Eisenhower protected him during the war because Patton won battles. But when the war ended, Patton became expendable. More than that, he became dangerous. Because Patton refused to accept the post-war order. May 8th, 1945. Germany surrenders unconditionally. The war in Europe is over. Allied leaders meet in Potsdam to negotiate the peace. Europe is divided. The Soviet Union takes the east, America and Britain take the west. Borders are redrawn, governments are installed, millions of people are displaced, moved, relocated to fit the new map. Patton watches this happen and sees betrayal. The Allies, he argues, fought to liberate Europe from tyranny. Now they're handing half of Europe to Stalin, a dictator as brutal as Hitler, a regime as totalitarian as the Nazis. He makes this argument publicly. In June 1945, Patton gives a speech in Los Angeles comparing the Soviet Communist Party to the Nazi Party. He calls both totalitarian threats to freedom. He suggests the Allies defeated the wrong enemy, that Germany should have been turned against the Soviet Union instead of being destroyed. The backlash is immediate. Politicians demand his resignation. Newspapers condemn him. The War Department issues official reprimands. President Truman, already dealing with the complexities of Soviet relations, is furious. Eisenhower summons Patton to his headquarters. The meeting does not go well. Eisenhower and Patton were friends once. They rose through the ranks together, served together between the wars, understood each other. But the war changed them both. Eisenhower became a political general, a coalition builder, a man who understood that winning the peace required compromise and patience. Patton remained a warrior who believed wars should be fought without hesitation and won without apology. In Eisenhower's office, Patton is told his public statements are unacceptable. He's ordered to stop criticising Soviet policy. He's warned that further incidents will result in his removal from command. Patton argues back. He presents intelligence reports about Soviet violations of ceasefire agreements. He describes forced population transfers, summary executions, political purges. He insists someone needs to tell the American people what's happening in occupied Europe. Eisenhower tells him that someone is not going to be Patton. The conversation ends badly. Within weeks, Patton is relieved of command of the Third Army and reassigned to the 15th Army, a paper organisation with no operational role. His job now is to compile lessons learned from the European campaign, to write reports analysing tactics and strategy for future military planners. It's a desk job. To a man like Patton, it's worse than death. Internal War Department memos from this period reveal the thinking behind the reassignment. One memo describes Patton as politically dangerous and increasingly uncontrollable. Another warns that Patton's celebrity status among soldiers and veterans makes him a potential political threat to current foreign policy initiatives. A third memo, written by a senior intelligence officer, suggests that Patton's return to the United States should be delayed indefinitely to prevent him from influencing public opinion regarding Soviet intentions. These memos were classified for decades. When they were finally released under Freedom of Information Act requests in the 1980s, they revealed something important. By October 1945, senior American officials viewed Patton not as an asset but as a liability, and they were actively working to neutralise him. Chapter 2. The Diaries and the Warnings. General Patton kept meticulous diaries throughout his military career. These weren't casual journals. They were detailed historical records, written in his own hand, documenting everything from tactical decisions to personal reflections. He wrote almost every day, sometimes for hours, filling leather-bound volumes with his cramped, precise handwriting. He believed history would vindicate him. He wanted his perspective preserved for future generations. After his death, the diaries were collected by his family. Some entries were published in biographies, others remained private for decades. Some have never been fully released, held back by the Patton family estate for reasons never publicly explained. But the entries that have been made public from October and November 1945 paint a disturbing picture of a man who believed he was being watched, controlled, and silenced. October 2nd, 1945. Patton attends a meeting with Soviet officers to coordinate occupation zones. The meeting is tense. The Soviets refuse to cooperate on prisoner exchanges. They deny Allied access to certain territories. They claim violations of ceasefire agreements that Patton knows are fabricated. He writes, "The Russians are impossible. They lie about everything. They're worse than the Nazis and no one wants to admit it. Eisenhower orders me to maintain diplomatic relations. I'd rather maintain my rifle aimed at their headquarters." October 15th, 1945. Patton inspects Soviet troop positions along the occupation zone boundary. He notes their equipment, their readiness, their disposition. What he sees alarms him. He writes, "Soviet forces are not demobilizing. They're repositioning. They have combat units forward deployed, supply lines established, logistics prepared for offensive operations. If we have to fight them, and I believe we will, we should do it now while our armies are still here, still equipped, still ready. In 2 years, we'll have nothing in Europe, and they'll have everything." October 23rd, 1945. Patton meets with German civilians, former Wehrmacht officers, refugees fleeing Soviet occupation. They tell him stories of mass arrests, forced labour, summary executions, entire villages emptied. He writes, "We promised these people freedom. We told them we were liberating them from tyranny. Now we're handing them to Stalin, who is every bit as brutal as Hitler. The only difference is Stalin is our ally. so we pretend not to see what he's doing. History will judge us harshly for this betrayal. October 31st, 1945. Patton submits a request for extended leave to return to the United States. He wants to visit family, rest, recover from years of combat command. He also wants to speak freely, away from military censorship about what he's witnessed in Europe. The request is denied by the War Department. No explanation is provided. He writes, "They want me here where they can watch me, where they can control what I say, where I can't reach the American people. I understand their game now." November 7th, 1945. Patton has lunch with a journalist from the New York Herald Tribune. The interview is supposed to be off the record, a background briefing about post-war Europe. Patton speaks candidly about Soviet intentions, about Allied failures, about the need for American military readiness. 2 days later, the journalist contacts Patton. The interview has been killed by editors. Someone from the War Department called the newspaper and asked that the story not run. The journalist is apologetic but clear. The article will not be published. Patton writes, "Even the press is controlled now. The truth is too dangerous for the American people to hear. They want everyone to believe we won the war, and everything is fine now. But nothing is fine. Everything we fought for is being given away, and anyone who points this out is silenced." November the 19th, 1945. Patton receives notice that his security detail is being changed. His regular driver, his aides, his bodyguards, men who have served with him for years are being reassigned. New personnel are being assigned to replace them. The official reason is routine rotation of personnel. Patton doesn't believe it. He writes, "They're putting watchers around me, new people who report to someone else. I recognise the pattern. I've used it myself in our intelligence operations. When you want to monitor someone, you put your own people next to them. I'm being treated like a security threat in my own command." November 25th, 1945. Patton's wife, Beatrice, writes him from the United States. She's worried about him. His letters have become dark, paranoid. He writes about being watched, about feeling trapped. She asks if he's well. He writes back, but his response never makes it into his diary. Later, Beatrice told biographers that Patton's letter frightened her. He wrote that he was planning to return home soon, and caused them a lot of trouble. He wrote that he intended to speak publicly about Soviet aggression and Allied failures. He wrote that he knew this would end his military career, but he didn't care anymore. He wrote, "Some fights are worth the cost." December 1st, 1945. Patton's regular driver, Sergeant John Mims, is abruptly transferred to another unit. Mims has driven Patton for 3 years through North Africa, Sicily, France, Germany. He knows Patton's habits, his routes, his preferences. He's loyal, competent, trusted. The transfer happens overnight. Mims is given orders to report immediately to a quartermaster unit in Belgium. He's not allowed to say goodbye to Patton. A new driver is assigned, a young private first class who's been in the European theatre for less than 3 months. Patton writes, "Even my driver is replaced now. They're not even being subtle about it anymore." This is Patton's last diary entry. 8 days later, he's in the car accident. Chapter 3. The collision that changed everything. December the 9th, 1945. Late morning. General Patton's Cadillac sedan leaves his headquarters in Bad Nauheim at approximately 1100 hours. The sky is overcast, threatening snow. Temperature is just above freezing. The roads are slick with frost but passable. Patton sits in the back seat. He's dressed in his uniform, wearing his leather jacket against the cold. His pearl-handled revolvers are on his hips. He carries a walking stick, an affectation from his days of cavalry service. Major General Hobart Gay sits beside him. Gay has served as Patton's chief of staff throughout the war. He's one of Patton's few remaining friends in the High Command, one of the few officers who still speaks to him regularly after his controversial statements. The new driver, whose name appears in the accident report as Private First Class Horace Woodring, sits behind the wheel. He's nervous. He's only driven for Patton a handful of times. He's not familiar with the general's preferences, his habits, his routes, the drive. should take less than an hour. They follow the main road south from Bad Nauheim, through small German towns still recovering from the war. Mannheim was one of the most heavily bombed cities in Germany. The RAF and American 8th Air Force dropped thousands of tons of explosives on its industrial districts. Much of the city centre was destroyed. Rebuilding has barely begun. The roads through Mannheim are in poor condition. Craters from bombs, debris from collapsed buildings. Some streets are still blocked entirely, forcing detours through unfamiliar routes. At 11:43, according to the accident report, Patton's Cadillac approaches a railroad crossing on the outskirts of Mannheim. The area is semi-rural, factories mixed with farmland. Traffic is light. A United States Army truck, identified in the report as a GMC 2.5-ton cargo vehicle, approaches from a side road on the left. According to the truck driver's statement, taken by military police at the scene, he did not see the Cadillac approaching. He claimed the sun was in his eyes, though the day was overcast. He claimed he was unfamiliar with the intersection, though the road was clearly marked. He claimed he made the turn at normal speed, though witnesses said the truck accelerated suddenly. The Cadillac's driver swerves right to avoid impact. Too late. The vehicles collide at the intersection. Now here's where the official story begins to fall apart. The collision is low speed. The Cadillac is travelling approximately 35 miles per hour. The truck is travelling approximately 15 miles per hour. The impact is glancing, not head-on. The Cadillac's front passenger side strikes the truck's rear cargo area. The damage is minor. The Cadillac's front bumper is bent. The headlight is broken. The hood is dented. The truck's rear panel is scraped but intact. Both vehicles remain operational. The Cadillac's driver, Private First Class Woodring, is uninjured. He has a small bruise on his hand from the steering wheel. Nothing else. Major General Gay is uninjured. He experiences momentary shock from the impact, but suffers no physical trauma. The truck driver is uninjured. He climbs out of his cab without assistance. General Patton, sitting in the back seat of the Cadillac, suffers catastrophic injuries. According to the initial medical assessment, Patton was thrown forward in the collision. His head struck a metal partition or support structure in the car's interior. The impact caused acute cervical spine trauma, specifically a comminuted fracture of the third cervical vertebra and a vertical fracture of the fourth cervical vertebra. The injury results in immediate complete paralysis from the neck down. Multiple forensic analysts who examined the case decades later noted severe inconsistencies with this explanation. First, the injury pattern. A forward impact of the type described should cause predictable trauma. Facial injuries, chest contusions, possibly head trauma. The passenger would hit the seat in front of them, the back of the driver's seat which is padded. Instead, Patton sustained a precise cervical fracture with no facial injuries, no chest trauma, no head contusions. Second, the biomechanics. For Patton to strike the partition with enough force to fracture his cervical spine, he would need to be travelling at significant speed relative to the car's interior. But the collision was low speed, and Patton was seated wearing his heavy leather jacket, which would have provided some padding. Third, the other passengers, both the driver and General Gay, sitting in front of Patton, experienced minimal impact forces. Gay later described the collision as a solid bump, nothing more. Yet Patton, behind them, experienced forces sufficient to break his neck. One forensic pathologist who reviewed the case in the 1990s suggested the injury pattern was more consistent with a direct blow to the back or side of the neck, the kind of trauma that might result from being struck by a hard object, rather than from impact with a car's interior. Another analyst noted that the specific fracture pattern, comminuted fracture of cervical 3, vertical fracture of cervical 4, is relatively rare in motor vehicle accidents, but more common in cases of direct trauma to the posterior neck. Without an autopsy, without X-rays beyond the initial hospital films, without detailed forensic analysis, these observations remain speculative. But they raise questions. Then there's the matter of the truck driver. According to the accident report, the driver was interviewed by military police at the scene. He provided a statement describing the collision. He was cited for failure to yield. he was released. His name appears in the report as Private Robert Thompson. No unit is listed, no serial number is recorded, no permanent address is given. Researchers have spent decades trying to locate Private Robert Thompson. Military personnel databases have no record of anyone by that name serving in the European theatre in December 1945. The truck's serial number, listed in the accident report, corresponds to a vehicle assigned to the Quartermaster Corps. But when historians tried to trace the vehicle's movement logs, maintenance records and assignment history, they found nothing. The truck existed on paper, but vanished from all documentation after December 9th. The military police who responded to the scene should have filed detailed reports, taken photographs, secured evidence. Standard accident investigation procedure, especially for a collision involving a 4-star general. No photographs were ever released. The military police reports were classified, then reported lost. No physical evidence from the scene was preserved. Within hours, the Cadillac was repaired and returned to the motor pool. The truck disappeared entirely. And Private Robert Thompson was never seen again. Chapter 4. 12 days in Heidelberg. The Heidelberg Army Hospital in December 1945 was one of the finest medical facilities in Europe. It had treated thousands of wounded soldiers during the war. It had experienced trauma surgeons, skilled nurses, modern equipment for 1940s medicine. The hospital specialised in combat injuries, including complex trauma cases that required intensive care. Spinal injuries like Patton's were rare but not unprecedented. The medical staff understood the protocols: immobilisation, prevention of secondary injury, monitoring for complications, physical therapy when possible. Patton arrived at the hospital at approximately 1300 hours on December 9th, less than 90 minutes after the accident. He was conscious, alert, able to speak. He described the accident to doctors. He reported complete loss of sensation and movement below his neck. He remained calm, even joking with the medical staff. "I've been closer to death than this before," he told one nurse. "I'll be fine." Initial x-rays confirmed the cervical fractures. Neurological examination confirmed complete paralysis below the level of injury. But the attending physicians were cautiously optimistic. The fractures, while severe, showed no signs of spinal cord transection. There was hope that with proper immobilisation and time, some nerve function might return. Complete recovery was unlikely, but partial recovery was possible. Patton was placed in skull traction, a device that immobilised his head and neck to prevent further injury. He was given oxygen support. His vital signs were monitored continuously. Nurses attended him around the clock. On December 10th, one day after the accident, Patton's condition appeared stable. His vital signs were strong. He was communicating with staff. He showed no signs of infection or complications. On December 11th, Patton's wife Beatrice arrived from the United States. The army had arranged emergency transport, flying her across the Atlantic on a military aircraft. She was escorted by senior officers who had worked to expedite her travel. When she entered Patton's room, he smiled. "I'm in a hell of a fix this time," he told her. She sat beside his bed and held his hand. He couldn't feel it, but the gesture mattered. For the next few days, Patton's condition remained stable. Doctors noted slight improvement in some reflexes. There was cautious talk of eventual transfer to a specialised facility in the United States. Physical therapy was discussed. Patton himself remained optimistic. He made plans. He talked about recovery. He joked about getting back to work. On December 13th, 4 days after the accident, Patton's condition began to change. He developed a slight fever. His breathing became more laboured. Doctors suspected early pneumonia, a common complication in paralysed patients who cannot cough effectively to clear their lungs. Antibiotics were administered. Oxygen support was increased. On December 14th, the fever worsened. Patton's oxygen saturation dropped. His breathing became increasingly difficult. The medical staff worked to keep his airways clear, but the paralysis made it nearly impossible for him to assist in his own treatment. On December 15th, 6 days after the accident, Patton's condition took a dramatic turn for the worse. He developed severe pulmonary edema, fluid accumulation in the lungs. His heart rate became irregular. His blood pressure fluctuated wildly. The doctors diagnosed acute heart failure, possibly triggered by a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot that had travelled from his immobilised legs to his lungs. Emergency treatment was initiated, but Patton's condition continued to deteriorate. Over the next 6 days, he slipped in and out of consciousness. The fever persisted. The pulmonary edema worsened. His heart struggled to maintain adequate circulation. On December the 21st, 12 days after the accident, at 1750 hours, General George Smith Patton Jr. died. The official cause of death: pulmonary embolism and congestive heart failure secondary to his injuries. The death certificate was signed by the attending physicians. The hospital issued a statement expressing condolences. The army notified next of kin. Flags were lowered to half-staff, and then the irregularities began. First, no autopsy was performed. This is unusual for several reasons. Patton was a 4-star general, one of the most prominent military figures in American history. His death under medical care, with unexpected complications arising rapidly, would normally warrant a thorough post-mortem examination. The official explanation was that the family declined an autopsy. But Beatrice Patton later disputed this claim. In interviews with biographers, she stated she was never asked about an autopsy. She said the army simply informed her that her husband's body would be prepared for burial and that no autopsy was necessary or planned. She said she didn't question the decision at the time. She was grieving, exhausted, overwhelmed. She trusted the military doctors who told her Patton died of natural complications from his injuries. Only later did she wonder why they were so insistent that no autopsy be performed. Second, Patton's complete medical records from Heidelberg Hospital were never released to the family. Beatrice requested the files multiple times over the following years. She wanted to understand what happened to her husband, why he declined so rapidly, whether everything possible had been done to save him. Her requests were denied. The army told her the medical records were classified for reasons of operational security. She was told the files contained sensitive information about medical procedures and treatment protocols that could not be disclosed. She never received the records. When historians and researchers sought the files decades later under Freedom of Information Act requests, they were told the records were missing. Some reports claim the files were destroyed in the 1960s per routine document retention policies. Other reports claim the files were lost when Heidelberg Hospital closed. Still other reports claim the files are held in classified archives but remain restricted. No one has seen Patton's complete medical records since December 1945. Third, several members of the medical staff who treated Patton were transferred shortly after his death. One surgeon was reassigned to a hospital in Japan. A nurse was transferred to a facility in England. The hospital administrator retired from military service within weeks of Patton's death. When researchers tried to interview these individuals in later years, most declined to participate. Some claimed they couldn't remember details of Patton's case. Others said they were bound by military confidentiality, even decades later. One physician agreed to an interview but died before it could be conducted. One nurse who worked in Heidelberg Hospital during December 1945 gave a brief interview to a researcher in 1976. She described unusual activity in the days before Patton died. She mentioned restricted access to Patton's room. She said only certain staff members were allowed to enter. She described visitors who came late at night, men in military uniforms who weren't logged in the visitor registry. She mentioned medical procedures that weren't part of standard treatment protocols. She said Patton received injections she didn't recognise, medications that weren't listed on his chart. When the researcher pressed for details, the nurse became vague and uncomfortable. She ended the interview abruptly and refused further contact. She died 2 years later. No additional interviews were ever conducted. Fourth, the timeline of Patton's decline doesn't match typical post-injury progression. Spinal injury patients certainly face complications. Pneumonia is common because paralysed patients cannot clear their lungs effectively. Blood clots are common because immobilised patients cannot move their limbs. Heart failure can occur due to the stress of injury and prolonged bed rest. But the speed and severity of Patton's decline struck some medical experts as unusual. One pulmonologist who reviewed the case in the 1980s noted that Patton went from stable and communicative to critical and dying in less than a week. While complications can arise quickly, the progression described in the available documentation seemed unusually rapid for a patient receiving intensive care in a modern facility. Another physician, a toxicologist, reviewed the symptoms described in newspaper reports from December 1945. Sudden pulmonary edema, cardiac arrhythmia, rapid deterioration. He noted these symptoms could result from injury complications, but they could also result from certain poisonous substances. Specifically, he mentioned digitalis toxicity, which causes cardiac complications and pulmonary edema and would be difficult to detect without specific toxicology screening. Without an autopsy, without tissue samples, without toxicology analysis, there's no way to confirm or deny such theories. But the possibility exists, and that possibility, combined with all the other irregularities, fuels the conspiracy theory that Patton didn't die from his injuries. He was killed. Chapter 5. The OSS operative's confession. For more than 30 years, the official narrative of Patton's death remained unchallenged. Tragic accident, medical complications, natural death given his injuries. Historians wrote biographies portraying Patton as a brilliant but troubled commander whose life ended in unfortunate circumstances. Filmmakers made movies celebrating his military genius while depicting his death as a sad footnote to a legendary career. His death was accepted as tragic but unremarkable. And then, in 1979, everything changed. An 84-year-old man named Douglas DeWitt Bazata walked into the office of a military historian working on a book about the Office of Strategic Services. Bazata said he had information about General Patton's death, information that had been classified for more than 3 decades, information that, if true, would rewrite history. Douglas Bazata was not a conspiracy theorist. He was not a fringe figure seeking attention. He was a legitimate war hero with verifiable credentials and a documented history of service in America's wartime intelligence apparatus. Born in 1911, Bazata grew up in Pennsylvania and joined the Marine Corps in the early 1930s. He served in various capacities until the outbreak of World War II, when he was recruited by the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, America's wartime intelligence agency. The OSS conducted some of the most sensitive operations of the war: espionage, sabotage, assassination, support for resistance movements, operations that couldn't be acknowledged publicly and whose details remain classified even today. Bazata operated behind enemy lines in occupied Europe. He conducted sabotage operations against Nazi infrastructure. He organised partisan resistance networks. He gathered intelligence that helped Allied forces plan operations. His service record is documented in declassified OSS files. His decorations include the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, and various foreign awards from governments he aided during the war. He was not a man prone to fantasy or fabrication, and he said he had killed George Patton, not personally, not directly, but as part of an operation ordered by senior American intelligence officials. According to Bazata, in late November 1945, he was approached by a high-ranking OSS officer. Bazata declined to name this officer publicly, saying only that he held a senior position in intelligence operations and had authority to order field operations without political oversight. The officer told Bazata that General Patton had become a problem. Patton's public criticisms of Soviet policy were undermining Allied unity at a crucial moment. The Cold War was beginning. The Yalta Conference had established a delicate balance between the United States and Soviet Union. American intelligence agencies were working to establish networks in Eastern Europe, networks that required Soviet cooperation, or at least Soviet tolerance. Patton's rhetoric threatened all of it. His threats to return to the United States and speak publicly about Soviet aggression could turn American public opinion against cooperation with Stalin. His celebrity status among soldiers and veterans gave him a platform that could shape national policy. The officer told Bazata that political leadership had decided Patton needed to be silenced, permanently. Bazata claimed he refused at first. He argued that Patton was right about the Soviets, that someone needed to speak the truth about Soviet intentions. The officer told him this wasn't about truth. It was about stability. It was about maintaining diplomatic relationships long enough to establish American interests in post-war Europe. It was about preventing a premature confrontation with the Soviet Union that America wasn't ready to fight. The officer told him it was a matter of national security, and national security justified any action. Bazata claimed he was not directly involved in arranging the car accident. He said that aspect of the operation was handled by others, specialists in staged accidents and traffic collisions, but he confirmed the accident was not accidental. The truck driver, he said, was an operative, possibly OSS, possibly another agency. The collision was planned and executed as a way to remove Patton without raising suspicions of foul play. But the accident wasn't supposed to kill Patton. It was supposed to injure him seriously enough to prevent him from returning to the United States and speaking publicly. A career-ending injury that would sideline him while appearing accidental. The neck fracture was a bonus, ensuring Patton would never command again. But then Patton started to recover. Within days of the accident, doctors were talking about possible rehabilitation, about eventual transfer to the United States, about Patton potentially regaining some function. That wasn't acceptable. According to Bazata, the decision was made to finish the operation in the hospital. He claimed he was part of a team that had access to Heidelberg Hospital. They posed as medical staff or military visitors, they gained access to Patton's room, and they administered a substance that would trigger the complications that killed him. Bazata wouldn't specify what substance was used. He suggested something that would cause cardiac and pulmonary complications consistent with his injuries, something that would be difficult to detect without specific toxicology screening, something that would appear as natural progression of his condition. He said Patton died believing he was succumbing to his injuries, never knowing he was being murdered. Bazata claimed the operation was compartmentalized. Only a handful of people knew the full scope. The operatives involved were told only what they needed to know. Records were destroyed or classified. Witnesses were silenced through transfers, retirement, or more permanent means. He said Soviet intelligence was aware of the operation. They tacitly approved because Patton's anti-Soviet rhetoric was creating problems for Stalin as well. But the Soviets were not directly involved. This was an American operation for American reasons. He said the decision came from senior levels of American intelligence, possibly with approval from political leadership, though he had no direct evidence of White House involvement. He said he had stayed silent for more than 30 years out of loyalty to his country and fear of retaliation against himself and his family. But now, in his 80s, with most of the principals dead, he wanted the truth known. He wanted history to record what actually happened. Bazata's confession was explosive. The researcher who first interviewed him was skeptical, but as Bazata provided details, as he named other operations he had participated in, as he described OSS procedures and protocols that matched declassified documents, the researcher began to believe Bazata was telling the truth, at least telling what he believed to be the truth. The researcher published a book in 1981 that included Bazata's claims. The book created immediate controversy. Historians dismissed Bazata as a fabricator. The CIA, successor to the OSS, denied any knowledge of operations targeting Patton. The army reaffirmed that Patton died of natural complications from his accident. But Bazata didn't recant. In 1984, he attended an OSS Veterans Reunion dinner in Washington, D.C. During the event, he stood and publicly repeated his claims about Patton's death. He told a room full of former intelligence operatives that he had been part of the operation. The room fell silent. No one challenged him. No one confirmed him. But no one laughed either. The silence was telling. Several attendees later told journalists they believed Bazata might be telling the truth. Others said the story was plausible, given what they knew about OSS operations during the period. Still others said Bazata was either lying or confused, mixing real operations with imagined ones. Douglas Bazata died in 1999 at age 88, maintaining his story until the end. To this day, no evidence has emerged to definitively prove or disprove his claims. but the fact that a legitimate OSS operative with a documented service record made such specific allegations has kept the conspiracy theory alive. Chapter 6: The Missing Evidence and the Cold War Context. If there was a conspiracy to assassinate General Patton, the evidence should exist somewhere. Intelligence agencies, even when conducting illegal operations, maintain records, operational plans, mission reports, personnel assignments, financial records, after-action reviews. These documents might be classified, compartmentalized, hidden in archives so secure that most government officials don't know they exist. But they exist. So researchers have been searching for decades. What they've found is a pattern of systematic absence. Every document that might confirm or disprove the assassination theory is either missing, destroyed, or classified beyond reach. Patton's medical records, missing. The accident investigation report, classified, then lost. OSS operational files from December 1945, heavily redacted. Personnel records for the truck driver, non-existent. Communications between the War Department and Patton's command, incomplete. Hospital visitor logs from Heidelberg, destroyed. Even routine documents that should exist, that have no national security implications, that would normally be preserved in military archives, are gone. This creates an evidentiary void. Conspiracy theorists point to the missing documents as proof of a cover-up. If there was nothing to hide, they argue, why are so many records missing? Skeptics argue that missing records prove nothing. Documents from 1945 are often incomplete. Archives have limited space. Files are destroyed per retention schedules. Sometimes things just get lost. Both arguments have merit, but the context matters. The Cold War was beginning in December 1945. The Office of Strategic Services was transitioning to the Central Intelligence Agency. American intelligence operations were becoming more sophisticated, more compartmentalized, more willing to conduct operations that violated both law and ethics in service of national security. We know this now because documents from that era have been declassified, slowly, over decades. We know about Operation Paperclip, which brought Nazi scientists to America despite their war crimes. We know about MK-Ultra, which conducted mind control experiments on unwitting American citizens. We know about COINTELPRO, which surveilled and disrupted domestic political groups. We know about assassination programs targeting foreign leaders like Fidel Castro and Patrice Lumumba. We know American intelligence agencies were capable of murder, deception, and massive cover-ups. So when someone suggests they might have killed an inconvenient general in 1945, it's not a crazy theory. It's consistent with what we know those agencies did. The question isn't whether American intelligence agencies were capable of such an operation. The question is whether they actually conducted one. And without the evidence, we cannot know for certain. Epilogue. What if Patton had lived? The final question haunts every discussion of Patton's death. What if he had survived? What if the accident had been less severe? What if he had recovered? What if he had returned to the United States? Would George Patton have become a political figure? Would he have run for office, bringing his celebrity status and military reputation into the political arena? Would he have testified before Congress about Soviet violations of the Yalta agreements, about forced population transfers, about political purges in Eastern Europe? Would he have written a book exposing what he viewed as Allied betrayals of the peoples we claim to liberate? Would he have shaped public opinion about the emerging Cold War? We'll never know. But the fact that we ask these questions reveals something important. Patton mattered. His voice mattered. His perspective, right or wrong, represented a viewpoint that vanished from American discourse after December 1945. Some historians argue that Patton's death was fortunate for America. His aggressive stance toward the Soviet Union could have triggered a premature confrontation that would have been catastrophic. The Cold War required careful management, patient containment, strategic diplomacy. Patton would have undermined all of that. Other historians argue that Patton was right, that confronting Soviet expansion immediately, while American forces were still mobilized in Europe, would have prevented decades of Cold War conflict, that his warnings about Stalin were prescient and should have been heeded. Both arguments assume Patton would have had significant influence if he had lived, and maybe that's why he died. The last line Patton wrote in his diary, just days before the accident, reads, "History will prove me right. They just don't want to hear it yet." He never got the chance to make his case. 79 years later, the debate continues. Was his death a tragic accident? A politically convenient outcome that some officials were relieved to see? Or a calculated assassination ordered by intelligence agencies that viewed him as a threat to national security? The files remain classified. The witnesses remain silent. The medical records remain missing. And George Smith Patton Jr. remains buried in Luxembourg, alongside the soldiers he commanded, his warnings unheeded, his voice silenced, his truth lost to history. Unless Douglas Bazata was telling the truth, unless somewhere, in some classified archive, the evidence exists, unless someday someone finds the files that prove what really happened on that December morning in 1945. Until then, we're left with questions, and sometimes the questions we cannot answer reveal more than the questions we can. The file shouldn't have existed. Clara Rains had spent 3 years analysing radar anomalies for Sentinel Defence Analytics, cross-referencing FAA flight paths with weather patterns, satellite debris, and the occasional flock of geese that confused outdated tracking systems. She'd seen every kind of glitch, every data corruption, every bureaucratic mislabelling that could make a spreadsheet lie. But she'd never seen 3 separate federal databases, FAA, FEMA, and CDC, share the same incident code for events that had nothing to do with each other, until now. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in March 2026 when the pattern emerged. Clara sat in her cramped Arlington apartment, the glow of dual monitors casting blue light across her face. Outside, the distant hum of the metro's last train faded into silence. She'd been running a routine check on rural radar anomalies, the kind of busy work that kept her contract renewed, when the algorithm flagged something unusual. 3 incidents, 3 different states, 3 different months. January 14th. Meteor sighting, Cisco, Utah. FAA logged unusual radar signature. Local fire department responded to reports of impact. FEMA designated it ENV-071KD. Follow-up. Closed within 18 hours. February 3rd. Mass illness event, Durbin, West Virginia. CDC investigated reports of 17 residents experiencing identical hallucinations. Designation, ENV-071KD. Follow-up, attributed to contaminated well water. Case closed. March 9th. Missing persons. Loma, Montana. 4 hikers disappeared during clear weather. FEMA deployed emergency assessment team. Designation, ENV-071KD. Follow-up. Individuals found disoriented but unharmed, no further action. The designation code was the hook. ENV-071KD didn't match any standard federal classification system. Clara had memorised FEMA's taxonomy during her first year at Sentinel. Every prefix, every suffix, every bureaucratic shorthand that turned disasters into data points. This code was wrong. Or more accurately, it was right in a way that shouldn't be possible. She pulled up the incident reports. Each one listed the same cleanup team in the footnotes. Department. 7 Response Unit. Clara opened a new browser tab and accessed the Federal Agency directory through her contractor credentials. She typed Department 7, no results found. She tried variations. Department 7, 7th Department, Division 7. She expanded her search to include the Office of Personnel Management database, the Congressional Budget Office's agency listings, even the Freedom of Information Act reading room with nothing. The clock read 12:33 a.m. Clara leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking in the silence. In Washington, agencies didn't simply not exist. Even the most classified operations, JSOC's Grey Fox, the NSA's Tailored Access Operations, the DOE's Nuclear Emergency Support Team, left paper trails, budget line items, redacted organisational charts, acronyms in appropriations bills. But Department 7 had no shadow, no trace, no echo in any database she could access. She should have closed her laptop and gone to bed, should have dismissed it as a data entry error, some clerk in 3 different agencies accidentally typing the same wrong code, should have remembered that curiosity was a liability in her line of work. Instead, she downloaded all 3 incident reports to an encrypted drive, cleared her browser history, and decided to dig deeper. That decision would be the last normal choice she'd ever make. Clara spent the next week building a timeline. She worked carefully, methodically, the way her father had taught her during the summer. He'd tried to get her interested in bird watching. Pattern recognition, he'd said, pointing to migration routes on a map. It's not about seeing one bird, it's about seeing where they all go. She pulled archived news reports from the 3 towns, Cisco, Utah. Local paper ran a brief story about the meteor, included a quote from a resident who described men in dark suits arriving before the fire department. The follow-up article, published 2 days later, made no mention of suits or federal agents, just a meteorite fragment donated to the local college. Durbin, West Virginia. Nothing in the news archives at all. Clara found a deleted social media post, cached by a web scraper, from a resident claiming government people had quarantined the elementary school for testing. The post had been removed within 6 hours. Loma, Montana. The missing hiker's story made regional news, but the official report was bland. 4 hikers from Seattle got separated from their trail group, spent a night in the woods, experienced mild hypothermia and confusion. A park ranger found them the next morning. The incident report listed no ranger's name. Clara cross-referenced the dates with satellite imagery from commercial providers. Cisco, thermal bloom consistent with impact, followed by ground vehicles arriving within 2 hours, at 3 a.m, long before local emergency services were notified. Durbin, no unusual activity visible, but cell tower data showed a 5-hour communications blackout in a 3-mile radius. Loma, cloud cover obscured the area during the critical 48 hours. Every lead led to a gap. Every question led to silence. On Thursday evening, Clara broke protocol. She called an old colleague from her graduate program at Georgetown, Marcus Webb, who'd taken a position with the Defense Intelligence Agency's Open Source Analysis Division. They met at a coffee shop in DuPont Circle, the kind of anonymous place where half the customers were having quiet conversations about things they shouldn't discuss in public. "You look like you haven't slept," Marcus said, stirring sugar into his espresso. "I need you to look up something for me," quietly. "I'm not pulling classified files, Clara. Not asking you to. Just check the DIA's unclassified organisational records. Tell me if you've ever heard of Department 7. Marcus frowned. "Department 7 of what?" "That's what I'm asking." He pulled out his phone, spent 2 minutes scrolling, then shook his head. "Nothing." "Why? You ever come across an incident code ENV071KD? "No, that's not a standard format." "Where'd you see it?" Clara hesitated. "Just something that crossed my desk. Probably nothing." Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. "If it's probably nothing, why do you look scared?" She didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "You ever hear stories about cleanup teams? Federal, but not from any specific agency? You mean like NEST? They're DOE? No, unmarked, just present when weird things happen, then gone. Marcus set down his cup. Clara, if you've stumbled onto something operational, you need to report it through proper channels and then forget about it. Seriously, I've seen contractors lose their clearances for less. What if the proper channels don't acknowledge it exists? Then it definitely doesn't exist, and you should stop asking. He stood, leaving a 20 on the table. I mean it. Some doors stay closed for good reasons. Clara watched him leave. She finished her coffee in silence, then took the metro back to Arlington, checking over her shoulder 3 times before entering her building. That night she found the photographs. She'd requested field documentation from the Cisco incident through a Freedom of Information Act query, a routine request that should have taken months to process. Instead, the response arrived in 4 days, a PDF containing 12 heavily redacted pages and 6 photographs. The photos showed the impact site: scorched earth, a shallow crater, scattered fragments of dark material, standard meteor documentation. But in the background of the third photo, Clara spotted something the redaction team had missed. 3 vehicles parked in formation, dark SUVs with no visible markings. She zoomed in. The resolution degraded, but she could make out a small emblem on the lead vehicle's door. White numbers on a black circular background. 7-13-4. Clara saved the image, enhanced it using forensic software, and confirmed what she'd seen. The badge was deliberately minimal, no agency name, no seal, just numbers. A designation that meant nothing to anyone outside a very specific circle. She ran the number sequence through pattern analysis. 7-13-4 could be a unit identifier, a radio call sign, a budget code. Or it could be nothing, random numbers chosen precisely because they conveyed no information. But if they meant nothing, why use them at all? Clara opened a secure document and began writing everything down. Every incident, every connection, every gap in the official record. She backed it up to 3 separate cloud services under false names, printed a hard copy, and sealed it in an envelope she hid behind her bathroom mirror. At 2:17 a.m., her phone rang. The number was blocked. Clara stared at the screen for 3 rings before answering. Silence. Hello? Nothing. Not even breathing. Just the faint hiss of an open line. Who is this? The call ended. Clara checked her phone logs. The incoming call didn't appear. No duration, no number, no record it had ever happened. She didn't sleep that night. Friday morning, Clara arrived at work to find an email waiting in her inbox. The sender was listed as Federal Records Compliance Office, an entity she'd never heard of. The subject line read, FOIA request number 2026-03-FAA-7719-DENIED. She opened it. The request for field documentation regarding incident ENV071KD, Cisco, UT, has been reviewed and denied under 5 U.S.C. Section 552B1. The requested materials are classified in the interest of national security. No further information can be provided at this time. This denial is final and not subject to administrative appeal. Clara checked her FOIA tracking portal. Request number 2026-03-FAI-7719 didn't exist in the system. She'd never been assigned that number. More importantly, she'd already received the documents. She had them saved on her laptop. Someone was trying to erase what she'd already seen. Clara closed her email and opened a private browser window. She navigated to a file-sharing service and uploaded every document she'd collected, setting the folder to auto-delete in 72 hours unless she renewed it. Then she sent the link to herself at 3 different email addresses, including one she'd created in college and hadn't used in years. Insurance. She spent the day working on routine tasks, acting normal, laughing at a co-worker's joke about the office coffee machine, but every time someone walked past her cubicle, she tensed. At 4:30 p.m, her supervisor stopped by. Gerald Costner, a former Air Force intelligence officer who'd transitioned to the private sector and spent most of his time in meetings. He smiled, casual and friendly. "Clara, you have a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" "Just wanted to check in." You've been putting in a lot of late hours this week, everything okay? Yeah, just trying to clear some backlog before the quarterly review. Good. Listen, I noticed you put in a FOIA request last week, Cisco Meteor thing. Clara's stomach tightened. Yeah, just routine. Wanted to see if there was any debris that might explain the radar signature. Find anything interesting? Not really. Pretty standard meteor documentation. Gerald nodded, still smiling. Great. Hey, just so you know, FOIA requests need to be cleared through my desk first. Contractor policy. No big deal, just make sure to loop me in next time. Of course. Sorry about that. No problem. He tapped her cubicle wall twice, a casual gesture. Have a good weekend. Clara waited until he was out of sight before exhaling. She pulled up her company's contractor handbook and searched for the FOIA policy. There was no requirement to clear requests through supervision. Not for unclassified materials, which was what she'd requested. Gerald was lying. At 5 p.m, Clara packed her laptop, took the elevator down to the parking garage, and sat in her car for 10 minutes watching the exit ramp. No one followed her out. No unfamiliar vehicles lingered nearby. She drove home through rush-hour traffic, taking random turns, doubling back twice. Nothing. She was being paranoid. Had to be. But when she arrived home and checked her apartment, she found her bathroom mirror slightly askew. The envelope she'd hidden behind it was gone. Clara stopped sleeping. She'd read somewhere that the human body could survive on 4 hours of sleep a night for weeks. The cognition degraded over time. She allowed herself 2-hour shifts, setting alarms, keeping her phone in her hand even while unconscious. Every creak in the building woke her. Every car door slam outside sent her to the window. She didn't go back to work on Monday. Instead, she called in sick, then drove to a public library in Silver Spring and used their computers to continue her research. The librarian barely glanced at her ID. Clara accessed the commercial satellite archives again, this time focusing on the Montana incident. Loma was a town of 487 people, surrounded by national forest, the kind of place where hikers went missing just often enough that local search and rescue teams had a routine. The 4 missing hikers, Sarah Donnelly, Marcus Price, Jennifer Torres and Kyle Hammond, had been experienced backcountry campers, all in their 30s, all from Seattle. The official Park Service report stated they'd been found 16 miles from their last known position, dehydrated and confused, with no memory of the intervening 31 hours. Medical evaluations showed elevated cortisol levels and minor abrasions, but nothing that explained their disorientation. Clara found a podcast that had covered the incident. The host interviewed a local sheriff who described the federal response as overkill for a simple rescue. When asked which agency had responded, the sheriff paused, then said, "They didn't say. Had badges, but I didn't catch the department." The podcast had been posted 3 weeks ago. Clara tried to access it now. The episode had been removed. The show's website listed all episodes except that one. She found a cached version through a web archive and downloaded the audio file. At timestamp 23:17, the sheriff said something she'd missed in the transcript. They set up a perimeter around the recovery site. Wouldn't let our people in until they'd secured the scene. I asked what they were securing. These were hikers, not criminals. Guy just looked at me and said, "Contamination protocol." Never explained what that meant. Contamination protocol. For missing hikers. Clara dug deeper into the background of the 4 individuals. Marcus Price's social media had gone dark after his rescue. His last post was from the trailhead, a photo of sunrise over the mountains. His Facebook profile still existed, but every post after the incident had been deleted. His friends' comments remained. "Glad you're okay, man. Call me when you can talk about it." She found a phone number for Marcus Price through a people search site and called it. The line rang 4 times before going to voicemail. His voice sounded tired. "This is Marcus. Leave a message." "Mr. Price, my name's Clara Rains. I'm a researcher looking into unusual federal responses to outdoor incidents. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about your experience in Montana last month. Please call me back at this number. It's important." She left her burner phone number, a prepaid cell she'd bought with cash that morning. 3 hours later, it rang. "Hello? You called about Montana?" The voice was male, cautious, not Marcus Price. "Who is this?" Doesn't matter, you need to stop asking questions about that. I just want to understand what happened. No, you don't. Trust me, Marcus doesn't remember, and that's a mercy. What do you mean he doesn't remember? I mean exactly what I said. Whatever they did to him, to all of them, it worked. He can't even talk about it without getting panic attacks. Leave it alone. Who did something to him? Who are they? The line went dead. Clara tried calling back. The number didn't connect. She sat in her car in the library parking lot, hands shaking. Someone was watching these incidents. Someone was intervening with witnesses, and someone knew she was asking questions. That night she found Major Emmett Crowley. Crowley's name appeared in a declassified Air Force memo from 1987, a routine personnel reassignment document that listed him as a radar technician, stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. Clara found his name again in a 2003 Veterans Forum post, where he'd commented on a thread about unexplained radar contacts. His post had been deleted, but the quote remained in someone's reply. We tracked them for years. The official story was always weather balloons or equipment malfunction, but some of us knew better. She tracked him through public records to a small town in New Mexico, where he'd retired 10 years ago. His address led her to a trailer park outside Roswell. Ironic, Clara thought, given the town's history. She drove 17 hours straight, stopping only for gas and coffee. The landscape shifted from green to brown, humid to arid, dense to sparse. By the time she reached Roswell, it was late afternoon, the sun turning the desert gold. Crowley's trailer was clean but weathered, a wind chime hanging by the door. Clara knocked 3 times before an old man answered. He was thin, maybe 70, with sharp eyes that assessed her immediately. If you're selling something, I'm not interested. Major Crowley? My name is Clara Rains. I need to talk to you about Department 7. His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. He glanced past her, scanning the empty street, then stepped aside. You'd better come in. The interior was sparse. A couch, a television, a bookshelf filled with aviation manuals and Tom Clancy novels. Crowley gestured to the couch and took a seat in a recliner opposite her. How'd you find me? Public records. I'm a data analyst. Pattern recognition is what I do. And what pattern led you to me? Clara pulled out a folder containing printouts of everything she'd collected. 3 incidents, 3 different agencies responding with the same designation code, a cleanup team that doesn't exist in any federal database, and witnesses who either can't remember what happened or disappear from public record. Crowley took the folder, flipping through pages without comment. When he finished, he set it on the coffee table and leaned back. You shouldn't be looking into this. Everyone keeps telling me that. No one tells me why. Because the people who run Department 7 are very good at making problems go away. And right now, you're a problem. So it does exist. Officially? Number? In practice? He gestured at her folder. You've already seen the evidence. They've been around since 1952, born out of Project Blue Book's classified annex. You know about Blue Book? Air Force program that investigated UFO sightings, closed in 1969. That's the public story. The truth is that Blue Book had 2 tracks. Track 1 handled the explainable stuff. Weather balloons, aircraft, Venus. Track 2 handled everything else. The cases where the physics didn't work. The cases where witnesses experienced shared delusions. The cases where something was left behind. Left behind by what? That's the wrong question. 7 doesn't care what causes the events. They care about containment. Their job is to maintain consensus reality. When something happens that contradicts what people believe is possible, 7 arrives and rewrites the scene. They're not covering up aliens or time travellers. They're erasing contradictions. Clara leaned forward. What kind of contradictions? Crowley stood and walked to his bookshelf. He pulled down a binder and handed it to her. Inside were photocopied documents, incident reports, budget memos, personnel rosters, all stamped with classification markings all decades old. 1974, Dulce, New Mexico. Entire town reported seeing geometric lights hovering for 6 hours. Hundreds of witnesses. News crews showed up. Then 7 arrived. Within 48 hours, every video was confiscated, every witness was interviewed, and the official story became military flares. A year later, half the witnesses couldn't remember seeing anything unusual. How is that possible? You'd have to ask them, but I've heard rumours. DARPA programs, neural interference tech targeted electromagnetic fields. They don't just erase evidence, they erase memory. Clara paged through the binder. Another incident. 1989, Shoshone National Forest. A group of hunters found a clearing where all vegetation had been desiccated overnight. The ground fused into glass. Department 7 response team arrived, declared the area contaminated and removed everything. Official explanation: lightning strike. "Why are you telling me this?" Clara asked. "Because you're already in their crosshairs, and maybe if you understand what you're dealing with, you'll be smart enough to stop." Crowley sat down again. "I spent 30 years tracking radar anomalies. I learned to recognise the pattern. Every few months something would happen. Time distortions, energy blooms, mass cognitive events. And every time, 7 would show up. They'd scrub the site, interview witnesses and disappear. I tried to compile a comprehensive report in 1995. 2 weeks later, I was reassigned to a desk job in Alaska. The message was clear. But you kept records, copies, hidden, because I knew someone would eventually come asking." He looked at her carefully. "You're not the first. Over the years, a few others have stumbled onto the pattern. Journalists, researchers, people like you. They ask questions, dig too deep, and then they disappear. Not violently. They just stop. New jobs in other states, sudden career changes. Sometimes they seem fine, just uninterested in the topic anymore, like someone flipped a switch." Clara's hands felt cold. "What do I do?" "Stop. Right now. Delete everything. Forget this conversation and move on with your life." "And if I don't?" Cruelly sighed. "Then you'll meet them eventually. And when you do, you'll have a choice. Most people choose to forget. It's easier that way." Clara stood, clutching the binder. "Can I keep this? I made it for you." "But understand, possessing those documents makes you a target. They've already noticed you. Now you're carrying proof." "Then they already know everything." "Probably." Crowley walked her to the door. "Good luck, Miss Rains. I hope you're smarter than I was." She drove back to her hotel room and spent the night scanning every page of Crowley's binder. Incident after incident, stretching back decades. The details varied, but the pattern remained consistent. Anomalous event, witness reports, Department 7 response, immediate cleanup, official explanation, fading memory. By 4 a.m, Clara had compiled a timeline that spanned 70 years. If Crowley was right, Department 7 wasn't just responding to unusual events. They were maintaining a specific version of reality, one where certain things simply didn't happen. But why? And on whose authority? She needed to see them in action. The alert came through on a Thursday morning. Clara had set up monitoring scripts across multiple platforms, FEMA dispatch channels, local news wires, social media, even amateur radio frequencies. She was looking for patterns: sudden federal mobilization, unexplained communications blackouts, stories that appeared and then vanished. At 7:43 a.m, her system flagged a cluster of social media posts from Thornton, Montana, population 1,122, located in a valley surrounded by national forest. The post described pillars of light visible above the tree line, lasting approximately 20 minutes before fading. One user posted a blurry photo showing vertical columns of luminescence, like aurora borealis constrained to narrow beams. By 8 a.m, several posts had been deleted. By 8:30, the local news site removed its brief article about the phenomenon. Clara checked FEMA's dispatch logs, no activity. FAA radar showed no unusual contacts. Weather Service reported clear skies. But at 9:15 a.m, her monitoring script caught a spike in encrypted radio traffic in the area, using frequencies associated with federal emergency response. She was in her car within 10 minutes. Thornton was a 9-hour drive from Roswell. Clara pushed her rental car to 80 miles per hour across empty highways, stopping only once for gas and energy drinks. She reached the Montana border by evening, the sky dimming to purple as she navigated through increasingly rural terrain. She arrived at Thornton just before midnight. The town was dark, most houses unlit, a single gas station glowing like a beacon on the main street. Clara parked at a motel on the edge of town and checked in under a false name, paying cash. In her room, she assembled her equipment: a digital camera with a telephoto lens, a radio scanner, binoculars, and a small drone she'd purchased 3 days ago. The drone was consumer grade but had a decent camera and could fly for 30 minutes on a single battery. At 1:30 a.m, Clara drove to the location where the light pillars had been reported, a forestry road leading to a hilltop with a view of the valley. She parked half a mile away and hiked the rest of the distance, carrying her equipment in a backpack. The hilltop offered a clear view. Below, Thornton spread out in a grid of streetlights and dark houses. Beyond it, the forest stretched into darkness. Clara set up her camera and waited. At 2:47 a.m, headlights appeared on the road below. 3 vehicles, dark SUVs moving in formation, no emergency lights, driving with deliberate speed. They turned onto a side road leading into the forest, toward the area where the light pillars had been reported. Clara launched the drone, keeping it low, using the trees as cover. The infrared camera showed the vehicles stopping in a clearing 2 miles into the forest. Figures emerged, 6 people in plain dark clothing, moving with practiced efficiency. They unloaded equipment from the vehicles: metal cases, tripods, devices Clara didn't recognise. One person set up a perimeter using what looked like portable fencing. Another assembled a sensor array on a telescoping pole. Clara zoomed in with her camera. The vehicles had badges on their doors. Even in low light she could make out the design. A black circle, white numbers, 7-13-4. She was watching Department 7 work. For the next hour, Clara documented everything. The team moved methodically, scanning the clearing with handheld devices, collecting samples of soil and vegetation, assembling what looked like lead-lined containment pods. One person stayed by the vehicles holding a tablet, occasionally speaking into a radio. At 4:15 a.m, Clara noticed something. One of the team members was looking around, scanning the tree line. He raised binoculars and pointed them directly toward her position. She froze. The man lowered his binoculars and raised one hand. He waved. Clara's breath caught. She was 300 yards away, concealed in darkness behind trees. There was no way he could see her, but he'd waved directly at her. She recalled the drone, packed her equipment, and ran back to her car. Her hands shook as she started the engine. She drove back to the motel, watching her mirrors, expecting headlights to appear behind her. Nothing. In her room, Clara immediately transferred the drone footage and photos to her encrypted cloud storage. She reviewed the images, zooming in on every detail. The team's equipment was unmarked. The vehicles had no license plates, just federal government tags with alphanumeric codes. She checked her camera's GPS data. Every photo she'd taken showed the correct location coordinates except for one, the image of the man waving. That photo's GPS coordinates placed it in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Impossible. Clara packed everything, checked out of the motel at 5:30 a.m. and started driving south. She wanted to put distance between herself and Thornton, get back to populated areas, somewhere with witnesses, somewhere safe. At 6 a.m. she stopped at a diner for coffee. While waiting for her order, she checked her phone. 3 new emails, all from addresses she didn't recognise, all sent within the last 20 minutes. She opened the first one. It was empty except for an attachment. The photo of the man waving at her. The same photo she'd just taken. But this version was different. The timestamp showed it had been taken 2 minutes before she'd pressed the shutter. The second email contained a satellite image of the hilltop where she'd been standing, marked with a red circle. The image was time-stamped 2:46 a.m, 1 minute before the vehicles had arrived. The third email had no attachment, just one sentence. "You're very good at this." Clara deleted the emails, paid for her coffee without drinking it, and got back in her car. She drove for 3 hours, taking random exits, changing directions, before finally stopping at a rest area outside Billings. Her laptop was in the trunk. She opened it. expecting to find her files intact. Every photo from Thornton was gone. The drone footage, deleted. The cloud backup, empty. Her car's GPS history had been wiped, but her documents folder contained one new file, rains_c_event_log.pdf. Clara opened it. Inside was a complete dossier on her. Her education, employment history, security clearance application, every FOIA request she'd ever filed, her home address, her parents' names, her college transcripts, photos of her at work, at home, driving her car. The last page contained a single line. Department 7 extends its regards. Below that, a phone number. Clara stared at the screen. They weren't threatening her. They were introducing themselves. She closed the laptop and sat in her car, watching trucks rumble past on the interstate. She should run, should disappear, should take Crowley's advice and forget everything. Instead, she took out her burner phone and dialed the number. It rang once. "Hello, Clara." The voice was male, calm, professional. "We've been expecting your call." The man on the phone called himself Agent D. Marrow. He didn't offer a first name, didn't explain what the D stood for. He spoke with the measured tone of someone accustomed to delivering information that wouldn't be questioned. "You've done impressive work," he said. "Most people stop after the first warning. You kept going." "Who are you?" "I think you already know the answer to that. Department 7, in a manner of speaking. The designation is more of a filing convention than an official name. We operate under various administrative codes depending on the fiscal quarter and operational requirements. You're telling me you're real. We're as real as we need to be. Would you like to meet in person? I think we have things to discuss." Clara's instinct was to refuse. Every thriller she'd ever read, every conspiracy documentary she'd watched, taught her that accepting such an invitation was how people vanished. But she'd already crossed too many lines. They had her home address, they had her files. Running wouldn't help. Where? Denver. Tomorrow. There's a federal building at 1961 Stout Street. 4th floor, room 447. Come alone. And if I don't, then you'll continue your investigation, we'll continue monitoring you, and eventually you'll end up somewhere unfortunate. I'd prefer to have a conversation instead. The line went dead. Clara drove to Denver, arriving late that night. She checked into a hotel downtown and didn't sleep. Instead, she spent hours reviewing everything she knew, preparing questions, trying to anticipate what Marrow would say. At 9 a.m, she stood outside 1961 Stout Street. The building looked like any other federal office. Grey concrete, minimal windows, a bored security guard at the front desk. She showed her ID, stated she had an appointment on the 4th floor and was waved through without question. The elevator opened onto a quiet hallway. Room 447 was at the end, unmarked except for the number. Clara knocked. "Come in." The room was small, furnished with a metal desk, 2 chairs, and nothing else. No computer, no phone, no files. Agent D. Marrow sat behind the desk. He was perhaps 50, with greying hair and glasses, dressed in a plain grey suit. He looked like an accountant. "Miss Rains." "Please sit." Clara took the chair opposite him. "You're Department 7. I represent the organisational structure currently designated as such. Though, as I mentioned, the designation is temporary. Next quarter will likely operate under a different budget code, embedded within a different parent agency. Why the shell game? Accountability is complicated when your mission involves information control. We exist in the gaps between agencies. Sometimes we're DOE responding to radiological incidents. Sometimes we're USGS investigating seismic anomalies. Sometimes we're CDC handling contagious cognitive phenomena. The designation changes. The work remains the same. Contagious cognitive phenomena? Marrow folded his hands on the desk. Reality is more fragile than most people understand. Occasionally events occur that contradict accepted physics. Not alien invasions or supernatural occurrences, just anomalies, time distortions, energy blooms that don't match any known source, mass hallucinations with no chemical basis. These events create cognitive dissonance. If left unaddressed, they spread. People talk. Stories grow. Belief systems fracture. So you erase the evidence? We contextualize it. We provide plausible explanations that maintain social cohesion. A meteor becomes a weather phenomenon. A mass hallucination becomes contaminated water. Missing time becomes hypothermia. We're not hiding the truth. We're preventing chaos. Clara leaned forward. You're rewriting reality. We're maintaining consensus. There's a difference. Is there? Marrow opened a desk drawer and removed a folder. He placed it in front of Clara. Before we continue, I want to show you something. She opened the folder. Inside was a photograph. Herself, maybe 9 years old, standing in front of a suburban house. Behind her, partially visible in the background, was a black SUV with a circular badge on the door. What is this? North Carolina, 2003. Your neighborhood experienced a localized temporal distortion. 17 families reported identical dreams. Clocks ran backward for 40 minutes, and your father called 911 claiming he'd lived the same Tuesday twice. We responded. We cleaned up, and we ensured no one remembered clearly enough to spread the story. Clara stared at the photo. She had no memory of this, but she remembered that house, that year, and she remembered her father acting strangely for weeks afterward. You did something to my father. We offered him a choice, the same choice I'm offering you now. Which is? Marrow retrieved another folder. Department 7 is always looking for analysts, people who can see patterns others miss, people who are already compromised, who've seen too much to go back to normal life. You're exactly the kind of person we need. You want me to join you. I want to offer you a future. You can't unknow what you've discovered. You can't publish it. No one would believe you, and we'd intervene before any story gained traction. You can't run. We'll find you. You can't hide. You already live in our database. But you can be useful. You can help us maintain stability. You can be part of the solution instead of a problem to be solved. And if I refuse? Marrow's expression didn't change. We have a process for that. Neural interference technology, derived from DARPA's cognitive security research. It's not mind control. It's more like data reconciliation. We can't erase specific memories, but we can make them feel unimportant, like a dream you can't quite remember. Within a week, you'd lose interest in this investigation. You'd move on, get a new job, maybe relocate, live a normal life. You'd lobotomize me. We'd help you forget an obsession that's destroying your life. Many people find it merciful. Clara stood. Her chair scraped against the floor. I need time to think. Of course. Take 24 hours. I'll be here tomorrow, same time. Come back with your decision or don't come back at all. Either way, the outcome is already determined. She walked out without responding. Clara spent the day driving aimlessly through Denver, trying to process what Marrow had told her. Every option led to the same place. Department 7 controlled the outcome. Join them or forget them. Comply or be erased. There was no third path. She thought about her father. Had he been given the same choice? Had he accepted the erasure, traded his memories for peace? She called her parents that evening. Clara, honey, is everything okay? Her mother sounded worried. I'm fine. Is Dad there? He's in the garage. Hold on. Her father's voice came on the line, warm and familiar. Hey kiddo, what's up? Dad, do you remember anything strange happening when I was 9? In North Carolina? A long pause. Strange how? I don't know, just anything unusual, around the neighborhood. Can't think of anything. Why? No reason, just something I was trying to remember. They talked for a few more minutes. Superficial conversation before Clara hung up. Her father remembered nothing. Either the Department 7 had been thorough, or he'd chosen to forget. That night, Clara sat in her hotel room with her laptop staring at the empty folders where her evidence had been. She could walk away, accept the erasure, wake up in a week with no memory of Department 7, no obsession with patterns, no fear of unmarked vehicles, a normal life, or she could join them, become part of the system that erased truth, help maintain the comfortable lie that kept society stable. Neither option felt like freedom. At midnight she made her decision. She didn't go back to room 447 the next morning. Instead, she drove to the airport and bought a ticket to Seattle. She turned off her phone, paid cash for everything, and tried to disappear into the crowd. For 3 days, it worked. She stayed in cheap motels, avoided cameras, moved constantly. But on the 4th day, she woke up in a Portland motel room and knew immediately that something was wrong. The room felt different. Her belongings were arranged slightly differently than she'd left them. Her laptop was closed, she'd left it open. She tried to turn it on, dead battery, though. She'd charged it overnight. Clara grabbed her bag and headed for the door. In the parking lot, her rental car was gone. In its place, a taxi sat with its engine running. The driver rolled down the window. "Miss Rains, I'm here to take you to the airport." "I didn't call a taxi." "I know, please get in." Clara ran. She made it 2 blocks before exhaustion overtook her. She collapsed on a park bench, gasping, and realised she couldn't remember when she'd last eaten. How long had she been running? 3 days? 4? The taxi pulled up beside her. The driver got out. Not a driver. Agent Marrow, wearing casual clothes, looking concerned. "You chose the hard way," he said. "Most people do." Clara woke up in a white room. Not a hospital. There were no medical instruments, no monitors. Just a bed, a chair, a small table. The door had no handle on the inside. Marrow entered an hour later, carrying a paper cup of coffee. "How are you feeling?" Clara said nothing. "You've been here for 2 days. We've been monitoring your vitals, making sure you're healthy. No one's hurt you." "Where am I?" "A federal medical facility, location classified. You're not a prisoner, Clara. You're a patient receiving treatment for acute stress disorder." "I don't have a stress disorder. Your behaviour suggests otherwise. 3 days of paranoid flight, irregular sleeping patterns, signs of psychosis. It's all documented." He set down the coffee. "This is what I was trying to avoid." "You made it harder than it needed to be." "What did you do to me?" "We initiated the reconciliation process. It takes about a week. Your memories of the Department 7 aren't gone. They're just becoming less important, like background noise. Soon you won't care about any of this." Clara tried to focus, but her thoughts felt slippery. She could remember Thornton, the photographs, Crowley's trailer. But the urgency was fading. Why had she been so obsessed? It seemed distant now, unimportant. "Fight it," she whispered to herself. "Don't," Marrow said gently. "It's easier if you let go." Over the next 3 days, Clara's grip on her investigation weakened. She could recall facts, but couldn't summon the drive to care. Department 7 existed. So what? Lots of classified programs existed. Why had she thought it mattered? On the 6th day, Marrow visited again. "We're releasing you tomorrow. You'll have a new job waiting, data analysis for a private firm in Austin. Good pay, benefits, fresh start. Your apartment in Arlington has been cleared out. Your parents have been told you're relocating for work. Everything's arranged. What about my files, my research?" "Gone. We've removed every trace. It never happened." Clara nodded. That seemed reasonable. But that night, alone in the white room, a fragment of memory surfaced. Her father, speaking to her when she was 9. Sometimes you have to remember things even when people tell you to forget. Pattern recognition isn't just about what you see, it's about what you hold on to. Had he said that? Or was she imagining it? She closed her eyes and tried to visualize her evidence. The 3 incidents. ENV071-KD, the badge numbers 7-13-4, the man waving at her in Thornton, the email, "You're very good at this." By morning the details had faded to impressions, but something remained. A feeling that she'd discovered something important. Clara was released on a Tuesday morning. They returned her belongings, her phone, her wallet, her clothes. Her laptop was gone, replaced with a new one. They gave her a plane ticket to Austin and an employment packet for her new job. She arrived in Austin that afternoon. Her new apartment was furnished, her name already on the mailbox. Her employer, a tech firm she'd never heard of, welcomed her enthusiastically. Her new supervisor explained her role, analysing market trends, nothing classified, nothing complicated. For 2 weeks Clara lived normally. She worked, grocery shopped, watched television, Sometimes she'd catch herself staring at nothing, feeling like she'd forgotten something important, but the feeling always passed. Then, one evening, she received an email. The sender was listed as Federal Records Archive. The subject line, FOIA request reminder. She opened it. Your request for records regarding incident ENV071KD remains pending. Estimated processing time 6 to 8 months. You will be notified when documents are available. Clara stared at the email. ENV071KD. The code meant nothing to her. She didn't remember filing any FOIA request. She should delete it. Instead, she searched her deleted emails, found nothing. Searched her browser history, nothing. But the code stuck in her mind. ENV071KD. She opened a private browser window and typed it in. No results, just like before. Before when? Clara closed her laptop and went to bed, but she didn't sleep. 3 months later, a junior analyst at NOAA named David Park was processing routine satellite data when his system flagged an anomalous file. Department 7 event rains.log. He clicked it. Inside were coordinates, timestamps and incident codes. One entry caught his attention. A predicted meteor sighting in rural Wyoming, scheduled for 3 days from now. David frowned. Predicted meteor sightings weren't part of NOAA's standard data. He checked the file's metadata, created 3 months ago, last modified yesterday. He tried to trace the file's origin, but the access logs instantly deleted themselves. David should have reported it to his supervisor, should have followed proper protocol for unexplained data. Instead, he wrote down the coordinates. 3 days later, he took a personal day and drove to Wyoming. He arrived at the coordinates just after sunset and parked on a hilltop overlooking empty grassland. At 9:47 p.m, lights appeared in the sky, vertical pillars just like the file had predicted. At 10:15 p.m, 3 black SUVs arrived and parked in the field below. David grabbed his camera and started taking photos. One of the figures looked up toward his position. Even in darkness, David felt seen. The figure raised one hand and waved. Clara sat in her Austin apartment, unable to shake the feeling that she'd forgotten something crucial. She'd started keeping a journal, writing down fragments of dreams that felt like memories, codes, numbers. A man in a grey suit offering her a choice. None of it made sense. But she'd learned to trust patterns even when she couldn't remember why. She opened her laptop and typed, Department 7. No results. She tried. ENV071KD, nothing, but her hands kept typing almost automatically. Department 7_event_rains.log, and somewhere in a classified server farm in Virginia, an automated alert triggered. A file had been accessed. Not by Clara Rains, the credentials had been deactivated months ago, but the search query had been logged. Agent DiMauro received the notification on his secure phone. He read it, sighed, and opened a new case file. Subject, Rains Clara, status, recursive awareness, recommendation, enhanced reconciliation. He closed the file and made a call. We have a problem, he said. The Rains case isn't resolved. She's starting to remember. How is that possible? I don't know, but we need to bring her back in. What about the other one? Park? Same protocol. They're both exhibiting pattern recognition despite treatment. It's as if the signal is calling to them. Then we need to find the source of the signal. Marrow looked out his office window at the Denver skyline. We've been trying for 70 years. Whatever creates these events doesn't want to be found. It wants to be seen, and it chooses who sees it. He hung up and pulled up Clara's file again. Her photo stared back at him from the screen. Taken at age 9, standing in front of a suburban house, a Department 7 vehicle visible in the background. Even then she'd been watching. Some patterns couldn't be erased. Some people couldn't forget. And somewhere in the American night another set of lights appeared in the sky, calling to those who could see. Department 7 would respond. They always did. But the pattern would continue. It always did.